Chapter 587. The gauze curtain could block the prying eyes of others, but it could not block the already connected minds between the two. Su Yorong looked at him and knew what he was thinking. After thinking for a moment, she lightly shook her head. The reason why Chen Chongqing felt that it was somewhat familiar was not only because the small black stone on the red plate was very similar in shape to the small black stone that he had, but also because the qi rippling from the small black stone was very similar to the small black stone that he had found in the Pavilion of Ascending Mist. In other words, the small black stone that the Pavilion of Divination had taken out might be related to Wang Jitsu. The little black stone that Wang Jitsu had left behind in the Lingyan Pavilion was a heavenly tome monolith. So could this little black stone be another heavenly tome monolith? After going to the Mausoleum of Books and the Mausoleum of Zhou, and conversing with Divine General Han Qing, he and Su Yorong were the clearest about the whereabouts of the heavenly tome monoliths that had been lost to the world, so they could not help but have some suspicions. In the past, the boiling stone assemblies had all taken out ordinary heavenstones, so those elders and important figures of the various sects who had participated in the boiling stone assemblies were also rather astonished. But those cultivators who were participating in the Boiling Stone Summit for the first time did not understand the difference. When they noticed Chen Chongqing looking towards the heavy curtains, they couldn't help but become very excited, thinking to themselves, "Little Principal Chen really does have deep feelings for his former fiancée." Most of the Xiaxingists from the south were sitting in the same direction as Holy Maiden Peak. At this moment, they noticed Chen Chongqing's gaze. Many of their faces revealed expressions of mockery or sympathy. Some disciples of Holy Maiden Peak thought about the incident of the annulment of the engagement in the capital and couldn't help but mock Chen Chongqing. They mocked Chen Chongqing for being so clingy and boring. Some people even pointed out that Chen Chongqing needed to look at himself in the mirror. Some things can't be done just because you don't want them. None of the southern cultivators directly mentioned Chen Chongqing's name, but everyone knew that these words were referring to him. This world-famous engagement had experienced far too many twists and turns, stirring up far too many storms. It was only last winter, when the Pope forcefully annulled the engagement, that it finally came to an end. In this story, in the beginning, Chen Chongqing was naturally the one who was insulted and hurt, but in the end, it was Su Yorong who had to bear all the humiliation. In their minds, the person who hated Chen Chongqing the most in the world was obviously Su Yorong. She was the holy maiden of the south, the heavenly phoenix true maiden that was adored and loved by countless people. She did not like Chen Chongqing, so there were naturally many people who did not like Chen Chongqing, especially the cultivators of the south. It was only natural that they would not treat Chen Chongqing well. Even if he was the future pope, they still had to vent the holy maiden's anger. The pavilions and terraces were all within the cool breeze, quiet and beautiful. Those mocking words towards Chen Chongqing were like willow catkins that were being blown away by the wind, constantly floating on the plaza and falling into everyone's ears. The orthodoxy priests had rather unsightly complexions. Mao Qiyu was calm and silent, and Ling Haizhiwang's thick brows were slightly raised in interest. Chen Chongqing retracted his gaze from the Holy Maiden Peak and touched his knees uncomfortably. Zhixiu did not care about these matters, but Tang 36 knew the inside story, so he gave a brilliant smile. From time to time, the brilliant sword light lit up on the stone floor between the pavilions, like the lightning that was commonly seen in summer, and also like the soul-stirring strokes on the murals. Other than the great Zhou army represented by Star Caesar Academy, the vast majority of the world's cultivators were still most accustomed to using the sword. Today's Boiling Stone Summit had seemingly never ceased with the sword glows. The cultivators that had the right to participate in the Boiling Stone Summit were all extremely talented geniuses, or at the very least, outstanding in potential and powerful in cultivation. At the very least, they were an entire level stronger than they had been in the Grand Examination and the Garden of Zhou. those that had the courage to walk onto the stone platform and challenge others, or perhaps those that had the right to be challenged, were at least at the middle level of ethereal opening. The matches that had already concluded had been carried out extremely brilliantly. Both sides had used their supreme techniques, not holding back at all, and under the watchful eyes of the powerful figures of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Orthodoxy, it was impossible for any overly serious accidental injuries to occur. However, it was inevitable that a few bloodstains would still be left on the stone platform. Although Chen Chongqing was very interested in the black stone, he had no intention of entering the stage, so naturally no one came to challenge him. With his current status, unless he wanted to, no one could force him to accept a challenge, just like last summer. Su Yorong's current status was even higher than his, so it was even less likely that she would participate in this matter. Thus, they quietly sat by the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, watching the matches on the stone platform. Somewhat strangely, as time passed, there was still no one who challenged the other two from the Orthodox Academy. Zhixiu only watched for a while before closing his eyes to rest. He did not seem to have much interest in those brilliant matches. Tang 36, on the other hand, was rather bored. He incessantly ordered the maids of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets to change the tea in his cup and comment on the snacks on his plate. Only when a certain person walked onto the platform did Zhixiu open his eyes. Tang 36 put down the teacup in his hand and took out a silk handkerchief to wipe the corner of his mouth, his expression turning serious. The one who entered the platform was Liang Banhu. His opponent was an expert from the emotion-severing sect from Hanqiu City. This expert from the emotion-severing sect had previously used an extremely spectacular myriad willows sword to easily defeat a female disciple of Gentle Stream Temple. He was around 30 years old, and his cultivation had already reached the upper level of ethereal opening. If it was in the past, he would definitely be worthy of the praise of a genius. It was just that in recent years, there had been too many cultivators who were younger than him, had even more outstanding talent, and had stronger cultivation. Liang Banhu was a disciple of the Mountly Sword sect, ranked 5th among the Divine State's 7 laws, so he was naturally the representative of these youths. Perhaps it was because he had just defeated a southern cultivator and his confidence was at its peak, or perhaps it was because the Divine State's 7 laws had stolen too much of his glory in these last 2 years and his dissatisfaction had accumulated too much. Of course, it could also be because of the resentment he felt from Su Li's letter destroying the Myriad Willows garden. This expert from the emotion-severing sect had unhesitatingly issued a challenge to the Mountly Sword sect. His challenge of Liang Banhu seemed to be a very casual choice, but many people were well aware that this was a choice that had been made after deep and careful consideration, and it even seemed somewhat sinister. Liang Banhu was Liang Xiaoxiao's blood brother, and now, the entire continent knew that Liang Xiaoxiao had once colluded with the demons, vainly attempting to murder his fellow disciples as well as Chen Chongqing and the others in the Garden of Zhou. After his plan failed, he had ruthlessly committed suicide, intending to frame Chen Chongqing. This emotion-severing sect expert had naturally chosen Liang Banhu as his opponent to make a fuss in this aspect. As expected, Liang Banhu had just walked onto the stage when this person spoke in a cold voice. "You might be Liang Xiaoxiao's blood-related brother, but I won't put his crimes on your head. However, I won't allow you to have the chance to obtain this celestial stone." Hearing these words, the stage became extremely quiet. Everyone knew that this emotion-severing sect expert was only intentionally finding a reason. In reality, he wanted to shake Liang Banhu's will to fight. However, neither the Mountly Sword sect nor the Holy Maiden Peak lineage, which shared the same voice and spirit, could give much of a response to these words. Liang Xiaoxiao and Liang Banhu were both descendants of the Liang household, and the role that the Liang household played in this period of history was far too complicated. If Liang Banhu was like Liang Xiaoxiao, Unable to forget his origins in the household and unable to maintain his identity as a disciple of the Mountly Sword sect, then him obtaining the Heavenstone was something that many factions did not wish to see. Guan Feibai's face was covered in a layer of frost, his gaze brimming with killing intent as he stared at the emotion-severing sect expert, but in the end, he did not move. Go Hanshi's expression did not change as he calmly gazed at Liang Banhu's figure. He had great confidence in his junior brother. In the silence, before the battle had even begun, a voice first rang out. The speaker was Tang 36. He looked at the emotion-severing sect expert and said, "If you want to fight, then fight. Why speak so much nonsense?" The mood on the stage changed, and the expression of the emotion-severing sect expert subtly changed. To everyone's surprise, this was not the end. Soon after, everyone heard Tang 36's next words. "Just like that old ancestor of yours. In the end, wasn't he still beaten into an idiot?" The sect master of the emotion-severing sect, the master of Hanqiu City, and the soul of the Tianliang Zhu clan were all one person, the old ancestor of many people, including the emotion-severing sect expert. This old ancestor was one of the storms of the 8 directions, the solitary drunk under the moon Zhu Luo. Tang 36's words were very impudent, very offensive, very unyielding, but if one carefully thought about them, they were not wrong. Whether it was in the rain in Xuanyang City or the spring breeze in the Myriad Willows garden, Zhu Luo had been defeated miserably. He had been chopped into an idiot by Su Li's letter. His words had greatly boosted the Mountly Sword sect's prestige. Guan Feibai gazed in the direction of the Orthodox Academy, thinking to himself, "Why has this fellow's personality changed today? If we meet in a little while, then I'll make him cough up less blood." The expression of the emotion-severing sect expert suddenly changed. He looked at Tang 36 and coldly said, "In a little while, I will definitely challenge you." Tang 36 shook his head and said, "You won't have the chance." The scene was in an uproar. Everyone was thinking, why would he have such confidence in Liang Banhu? But no one noticed that he had moved closer to Chen Chongqing's side, using a voice that only the two of them could hear. He asked in a low voice, "From your perspective, between Liang Banhu and this idiot, who is stronger?" Chen Chongqing asked, "Why do you seem so worried right now?" Tang 36 said, "I feel that, in order to vent your anger, I've cursed Zhu Luo to this extent. In a little while, that guy will definitely fight me to the death, so it's best not to touch him." Chen Chongqing looked at Liang Banhu's figure and said, "There's no need to worry. You're right, that person won't have the chance." He and Go Hanshi were both well versed in the Taoist canon, rarely seen in the world. Amongst their peers, their eyesight was naturally extremely good. Go Hanshi had never been worried about Liang Banhu. Chen Chongqing also thought this way. Liang Banhu and Liang Xiaoxiao were different. Liang Xiaoxiao was a pine tree in a dark stream. Liang Banhu was a blade of grass on a sunny slope. Liang Banhu had a very wooden personality. He didn't say much, and even the expression on his face rarely changed. Of the Divine State's 7 laws, he had always been the least famous. But this did not mean that he was the weakest. Moreover, there were no weaklings among the Divine State's 7 laws. Liang Banhu unsheathed the sword at his waist and looked at the emotion-severing sect expert. He said one word, "Please." The emotion-severing sect expert slightly raised his eyebrows, preparing to say something more. However, Liang Banhu did not give him another chance to speak. A plume of dust abruptly appeared on the tranquil stone plateau. Like a dragon of dust, it charged forward with incredible speed. A simple and vigorous chi, like that of yellow earth, appeared in the perception of the crowd. The nearby lake seemed to sense some sort of pressure and began to ripple slightly. No one blinked, no one had the time to blink. The plume of dust surged and the yellow dragon arrived. Liang Banhu arrived in front of the emotion-severing sect expert. The emotion-severing sect expert's pupils constricted. he felt an extremely intense sense of danger. He had not thought that Liang Banhu's sword style would be so different from his personality. It was actually so violent and unyielding. How could it break such a violent sword intent? There was only an even more violent sword intent. With a howl, the emotion-severing sect expert's sword pierced through the air, howling forward. Without the slightest intention of retreating, it directly stabbed towards Liang Banhu. Liang Banhu's expression did not change, as if he was still that farmer plowing the fields. He wielded his sword like it was a hoe, swinging it straight down. This attack seemed to be a very ordinary sword technique, and in reality, it was also a very ordinary sword technique. This attack was not fast, not even 1/5 the speed of the Heavenly Tao Academy's Sword of Hithering Light. This attack was not vicious, not even the slightest bit of chi from the Orthodox Academy's toppling mountain staff. This attack was not beautiful, not even having the right to be compared to the legendary Departing Spring of South Stream Temple. Compared to the countless exquisite sword styles of the Mountly Sword Sect, Liang Banhu's attack had absolutely nothing worth mentioning. But this attack was very steady. Whether it was the hand gripping the sword or the sword technique itself, they were all very steady. It was like an unmoving cliff, like a mountain path. The reason this attack could be so steady was because this sword style was the foundation of the countless sword styles of the Mountly Sword Sect. Mountain Gate Sword. Zheshio gazed at the sword glows that were not particularly dazzling, but a light flashed through his eyes, which then began to blaze. Chapter 588. Yes, the sword style that Liang Banhu used was the most ordinary Mountain Gate sword of the Mountly Sword Sect. Any disciple that entered the Mountly Sword Sect had to learn this sword style in their first year. Chen Chongxing had learned this sword style before, so he naturally recognized it, but it wasn't until he saw Liang Banhu's sword move that he understood that Mountly was indeed worthy of being called the Sect of 10,000 Swords. Even the most basic of sword styles had their own essence that couldn't be ignored within Liang Banhu's sword move. Chen Chongxing could see the concept of the stupid sword. Liang Banhu's metal sword clashed with the sword of the emotion-severing sect expert. A muffled sound. When fierce sword intents clashed, who was stronger? Naturally, the more stable sword intent was stronger. The hillside facing the sun was covered in perfectly straight ridges, without the slightest deviation. Liang Banhu's metal sword clashed with the sword of the emotion-severing sect expert, but the next sword followed closely behind. His hand that gripped the sword was too stable, his sword too stable, to the point that the changes between sword moves seemed to be without the slightest delay. 10 odd sword cries resounded over the summit of Mount Han. In just a few moments, Liang Banhu and the emotion-severing sect expert had already exchanged several moves. The metal sword was as stable as before, and it continued to advance. It was like walking through the ridges of the fields, but in reality, it was even more like climbing the steep peaks of Mountly. It did not walk fast, but its footsteps were extremely stable, so one day it would reach the highest point. The dust on the stone platform pervaded the air, sword glows appearing and disappearing. Suddenly, with a clear cry, Liang Banhu withdrew his sword and lightly retreated several zhang, his feet landing on the ground. His hand gripping the metal sword was still stable, his expression still calm, just like a farmer that had just finished plowing for the day. The emotion-severing sect expert somewhat disbelievingly looked at his chest. At some unknown time, a wound had appeared there. The wound was not deep and did not bleed too much, but it was very straight, looking like it had been drawn on. Victory and defeat in this battle had already been decided. Many people had thought that Liang Banhu might win. Although he was the least famous of the Divine State's 7 laws, he was still one of the Divine State's 7 laws. But no one could have imagined that he would win so easily, or more accurately, that he would win so steadily. Only by completely grasping the situation could one not give the opponent any chance, could one be like plowing a field or climbing a mountain, could one give off such a steady and natural feeling. Even more shocking was that from start to finish, he had used the most ordinary sword style of Mountly, the Mountain Gate sword. Admit it. Liang Banhu sheathed his sword, clasped his hands and bowed to the emotion-severing sect expert, then returned to the Mountly sword sect group, his expression unchanged. But Zheshio's eyes were the sharpest. He noticed that when he sheathed his sword, his sleeve was slightly trembling. In the face of a powerful enemy, his hand that held the sword was so steady. Now that he had won, why was his hand trembling? Naturally, it wasn't nervousness or uneasiness, but a faint excitement. In other words, it was the joy of venting the stuffiness in one's chest. The injured emotion-severing sect expert was helped back to receive treatment from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. A wandering cultivator from the northwest, seeing his pale face and dejected appearance, slightly frowned and turned in the direction of the Mountly sword sect. Tianliang County was in the northwest. Other than the Snow Mountain sect, all the sects and vagrant cultivators within tens of thousands of kilometers were inextricably linked to the emotion-severing sect or the Zhu clan. In other words, they all worshipped Zhu Luo as a god. It was obvious that this wandering cultivator would issue a challenge to the Mountly sword sect. The Mountly sword sect had not given him this chance. Guan Feibai walked onto the field and impassively said to the wandering cultivator, "Come. Since I know that you want to challenge me, it's better to be straightforward and let me challenge you." The Mountly sword sect was not an inflexible sect with a unified style, but Guan Feibai's style truly was the most prominent in the Mountly sword sect. This style was direct, fierce, unyielding, and arrogant. It had originated from Su Li and had been around for several hundred years. Guan Feibai's cold voice caused the area around the stone platform to grow even quieter. The wandering cultivator from the northwest had a rather unsightly complexion, but in the end, he could no longer remain where he was and slowly walked out. Guan Feibai held his sword horizontally in front of his eyes, his expression indifferent and saying nothing. The wandering cultivator from the northwest slowly unsheathed his sword, his expression solemn. His sleeves drifted in the wind as his qi began to rise. A clear howl. Guan Feibai rushed forward, his unsheathed sword appearing in the wind as he slashed at the wandering cultivator from the northwest. The dust that was slowly settling on the stone platform once more began to pervade the air, and the lake water shook even more violently. Swish, 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 swish. Four extremely clear sounds of swords piercing through flesh resounded as four sword glows cleaved apart the wind and water. The wandering cultivator grunted and retreated again and again, but he was simply incapable of blocking Guan Feibai's sword. Several bloody wounds appeared on his chest. "Enough," Gohanshi said. His voice was very soft, but everyone around the stone platform could hear it clearly. Guan Feibai's sword energy was in the midst of a frenzy, but when he heard his senior brother's words, he forced himself to stop. With a cracking sound, several fine cracks appeared on the bluestone under his feet. The wandering cultivator had never imagined that he could stop at a word, and he really could stop at a word. He could no longer use his defensive sword technique, and his true essence was being reversed, so how could he stop? Like a drunkard, he constantly retreated, his steps becoming more and more disorderly. In the end, he failed to stand firm and fell on his butt, cutting a particularly sorry figure. At this time, Guan Feibai had already sheathed his sword and turned around, walking back to the Mountly sword sect. That northwest wandering cultivator looked at his back, his face pale to the extreme, full of shame and pain. His mind was agitated, and coupled with his internal injuries acting up, he finally couldn't hold back and spat out a mouthful of blood. The stone platform by the lake was still quiet, even quieter than before, like a deathly stillness. Tang 36 said nothing, and for once, he did not mock Guan Feibai. The crowd was stunned by Guan Feibai's cultivation in the sword and his lethality. They were also speechless, but they did not notice a detail in this battle that had passed in the blink of an eye. Zhixiu noticed, and with a slightly stern expression, he said, "He's still using the Mountain Gate sword." At this moment, a furious rebuke came from the stone platform. "Your Mountly sword sect is truly going too far." Everyone could clearly see the current situation. This was a battle between the Mountly sword sect and Tianliang County. The relationship between the Mountly sword sect and the cultivators of Tianliang County was very complicated. Because Su Li had once killed half of the Liang household, because of Liang Xiaoxiao and Liang Banhu's identities and what had happened to them, because of that night rain in Xuanyang City last year, and because of that letter that had burned the Myriad Willows garden into scorched earth this year. The two sides had already formed a deep grudge that could not be resolved. At a time like this, the person who still wanted to seek justice for the cultivators of Tianliang County naturally also came from Tianliang County. Scholar who was an expert of Hanqiu City. Many years ago, this person's talent in cultivation had obtained the joint recognition of the Great Zhou Imperial Court and the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. Everyone was very sure that as long as he succeeded in entering star condensation, he would assuredly be able to enter the proclamation of liberation. In the north, he even had the reputation of being invincible in the ethereal opening realm. Now that Liang Banhu and Guan Feibai had both moved, he naturally had to challenge Go Hanshi. The mood instantly became rather tense. Go Hanshi had been well versed in the Taoist canon since he was a child. In terms of intelligence, willpower, and comprehension, he was one of the best. If not for Qiushan Jun in Mount Li and Su Yorong and Chen Changxing outside Mount Li, he would assuredly be the most suitable leader of the human world's younger generation. Although scholar whose reputation was not as resounding as his, he had cultivated for many more years than Chen Changxing. In both cultivation and experience, he was superior. For these two experts to exchange blows in the boiling stone summit, one could imagine just what sort of intense and marvelous battle would ensue. Go Hanshi walked onto the stage and nodded at Scholar Hu, but he did not speak. Scholar Hu said that the Mountly sword sect was bullying others too much. He did not reply, did not argue, because although he was skilled in this path, he was not willing to do so. But in the eyes of everyone else, was this sort of calmness and silence not a form of disregard and humiliation? Scholar Hu expressionlessly asked, "Do you not have anything you want to say?" Go Hanshi shook his head. He had nothing he wanted to say. Starting from that storm in Xuanyang City to that emotion-severing sect expert mentioning Liang Xiaoxiao, it was foreordained that there would be a battle today. The mountain gate of Mount Li was a real gate. Upon opening this gate, one could see Mount Li. The people of the Mountly sword sect all had different personalities, but they all liked to get straight to the point. Go Hanshi was a gentle person, but he was no exception. He unsheathed his sword and thrust forward. It was only one strike. Scholar who had lost. A crushing defeat. This strike was called straight to the point. The first move of the Mountly sword sect's Mountain Gate sword. The lakeshore was quiet. The gazes of the crowd constantly shifted between the unconscious and injured Scholar Hu and the returning Go Hanshi. They were shocked, speechless, gradually becoming perplexed. Chen Changxing was also somewhat perplexed, but it was not because Go Hanshi had so easily defeated his opponent. He had always admired, even admired, Go Hanshi. He had always believed that the reason he had been able to defeat Go Hanshi in the grand examination was not because he was stronger than Go Hanshi, but because he had more reasons than Go Hanshi to take first place of the first banner in the grand examination. He had no longing for this world. That scholar who had been praised in the north as invincible in the ethereal opening realm, but so what? If he could defeat a cultivator at the initial stage of star condensation, then Go Hanshi could too. He didn't understand, and the reason for his uneasiness was that from Liang Ban Hu to Guan Fei by to Go Hanshi, they all used the Mountain Gate sword of Mount Li sword sect. This could be understood as the confidence of the disciples of Mount Li and the pride of the 7 rules of God. But he always felt that behind this choice, there should be some other meaning hidden. Because of Liang Xiaoxiao. Tang 36 looked at the location of the Mountain Li sword sect. His expression was not as carefree as usual, but rather serious. Chen Chongxing didn't understand and asked, Liang Xiaoxiao? Tang 36 took back his gaze and looked at him. Many people have forgotten who was the first place of the first banner in the grand examination before you. Chen Chongxing remembered and said, It was Liang Xiaoxiao. That's right. Even among the 7 people, Liang Xiaoxiao's talent and strength were outstanding. Some people only know that Guan Fei Bai's perseverance was amazing when he studied sword arts, and that he practiced all the sword arts in the foundation method of Mount Li sword sect to the point of perfection. But they don't know that Liang Xiaoxiao is not weak. He even practiced the sword of Mount Li sword sect's sword of opening into a true killing technique. Tang 36 said, In the hearts of the disciples of Mount Li sword sect, the sword of opening is Liang Xiaoxiao's sword. They use his sword arts to fight, and the meaning they want to express is very clear. Zhixiu looked at the location of the Mountain Li sword sect. Deep in his eyes, a blood-red color gradually appeared. Chen Chongxing thought and said, I don't think so. Chapter 589. Liang Xiaoxiao, a disciple of the Mount Li sword sect, was once one of the Divine Kingdom's 7 laws. Because of his hatred, this young genius, who should have had an infinitely bright future, ultimately embarked on the path of betraying humanity. He colluded with the demons, stirring up a storm of blood in the Garden of Zhou, and attempted to assassinate Chen Chongxing, Qi Jian, and the others. Even after he failed, he was still unwilling to give up, using his own death as a sacrifice for the most unyielding method. But with Su Li's return to Mount Li, the end of Mount Li's internal strife, Chen Chongxing's return to the capital, and Zhuang Huanyu's suicide to escape punishment, all debate and suspicion came to a screeching halt. Henceforth, Liang Xiaoxiao became Mount Li's greatest humiliation, or perhaps it could be said that the place where he was most vulnerable to attack. That expert from the emotion-severing sect had done exactly this. The Mount Li sword sect's response was unyielding and clear. According to the rules of the Mount Li sword sect, even though Liang Xiaoxiao had died, he was still expelled from the sect and was no longer viewed as a disciple of Mount Li. However, in the eyes of Go Hanshi and the others, that once talented young swordsman was still a fellow disciple, not to mention that Liang Banhu had always been his blood brother. Hatred and shame were just one aspect. After cultivating together for 10 whole years, how could they forget so quickly? Tang 36 asked in confusion, Do you really think that they are not targeting you? Liang Xiaoxiao had died outside the Garden of Zhou in Hanchu City, committing suicide, but if one looked at it from another perspective, was it not the same as dying under Chen Chongxing's sword? Just like when Zhuang Huanyu committed suicide by the well of the Heavenly Academy, the teachers and students of the Heavenly Academy, including the famous Guan Bai, would still blame this on Chen Chongxing. No one said that Chen Chongxing had done anything wrong in this matter, but just like what was said before, gratitude and grudges were always clear and unreasonable. Tang 36 had thought of this and reminded Chen Chongxing. Chen Chongxing shook his head and said, Maybe it's just a memento. Tang 36 raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't really believe this explanation. Zhixiu said, What Chen Chongxing meant was that if you died, no matter how you died, he would never forget you. Occasionally, he would use the 3 swords of Wen Shui to reminisce. Tang 36 glared at him and said, When did you become so talkative? Tianliang County had an old grudge with the Mount Li sword sect, which was why Scholar Hu and the others had challenged them, but they had lost 3 times in a row. The cultivators from other places naturally would not seek trouble, and the scene became rather cold and cheerless. Then, Zhong Hui stepped forward. This was a matter of course, so much so that when the spectators saw him walk onto the field and look at Go Han Shi, they subconsciously let out a sigh of relief. In last year's grand examination, Chen Chongqing was first upon the first banner, with Go Han Shi second and Zhong Hui third. In the newly announced proclamation of golden distinction, Zhong Hui was still closely behind these two. In the 1.5 years after the end of the grand examination, Zhong Hui's progress was godly, and he had already cultivated to the peak of ethereal opening. Compared to his somewhat lucky third place upon the first banner, his position on the proclamation of golden distinction was a true reflection of his current status amongst the younger generation of cultivators. But he was still below Chen Chongqing and Go Han Shi. So he naturally had to challenge Go Han Shi in the Boiling Stone Summit, and then Chen Chongqing. He calmly looked at Go Han Shi, his peripheral vision falling upon Chen Chongqing. This sort of calmness represented confidence. Guan Fei Bai was also very confident, and at the same time very proud. He had always looked down upon Zhong Hui, and felt that this scholar from Scholartree Manor was feigning calmness. He coldly laughed a few times, and prepared to enter the field to meet his opponent. Go Han Shi stopped his junior brother. Zhong Hui did not speak, but everyone knew that the target of his challenge was Go Han Shi. He wanted to give his opponent sufficient respect. The lake breeze lightly blew upon Zhong Hui's sleeves and upon the fine sand on the stone plateau. Go Han Shi walked on the surface of the fine sand, leaving behind shallow footprints. Zhong Hui looked at him, his expression calm, even somewhat wooden, as he unsheathed his sword from its sheath. Following his movements, his sleeves instantly calmed down. Because the wind blowing from the surface of the lake had stopped, chopped into pieces by the sword intent he emitted, vanishing into the air. Go Han Shi slightly raised his eyebrows, somewhat surprised. Rumors and seeing with one's own eyes were ultimately different. Everyone said that Zhong Hui had already cultivated to the peak of ethereal opening, and that he might even become the second extraordinary individual after Qiu Shanjun to succeed in star condensation, but only by personally seeing and feeling the lake breeze that had passed away could people be certain that his sword intent was already so powerful, only a step away from that threshold. Go Han Shi's expression grew solemn. The mood on the platform also grew solemn. However, unlike what people imagined, Go Han Shi's solemnity was not because he had realized that he might lose, but because he thought that he could no longer conceal his strength. Without thinking for too long, he made his decision. An indistinct, extremely light qi began to emanate from his body. The lake breeze that had drifted through the air seemed to be summoned by some sort of energy. Slowly but clearly, it began to take form once more, leisurely drifting around him. At this moment, the blazing sun was high in the sky. Although this was the summit of a high and cold mountain, the temperature had gradually warmed. The blazing rays of light fell upon the surface of the lake and those stones, refracting and scattering, somewhat dazzling. Those bright rays of light were not able to directly fall upon Go Han Shi's body, because wisps of the lake breeze drifted around his body. The rays of light refracted and scattered once more, still bright, but no longer so dazzling. Moreover, they were cut into countless specks of light by the lake breeze, reflecting on his blue robes like the scenery of a forest. But also like countless stars. That indistinct qi suddenly became incomparably calm, incomparably clear. Countless specks of starlight danced in the space between his eyebrows and his robes, but they did not go far. The stone platform by the lake was deathly still. For a very long time, no one opened their mouth to speak. Just when those specks of starlight began to dance, Zhong Hui's expression changed. His calm, even somewhat wooden expression was instantly replaced by shock and defeat. His face became very pale, without a trace of blood. After some time, he finally awoke and said in a trembling voice, "I lost." As he said these 3 words, he seemed to be in great pain. After saying this, he seemed much more relaxed. Sheathing his sword, he turned and left. The stone platform by the lake was still quiet. A clear and gentle voice rose up. "Congratulations, senior brother." The speaker was Su Yorong. Many people had already guessed or understood why Zhong Hui had conceded, but only when she said these words did they dare to believe it, because it truly was rather inconceivable. The entire crowd was silent. The silence had already persisted for a very long time. Go Han-shi had already succeeded in star condensation. His expression was very calm. The disciples of the Lishan sword sect could not conceal their pride. Guan Fei Bai still had that deadpan face, but his gaze towards the people of the Orthodox Academy was clearly somewhat different. Chen Chongqing said emotionally, "Admirable." Zhixiu said, "Second fastest." Amongst the younger generation, Go Han-shi could be ranked second in terms of speed in star condensation. Mou and Tian Haixing Shui were both slightly older than him when they succeeded in star condensation. As for the person ranked first, it was obviously Qiu Shan Jun Tang 36, expressionless, said in a low voice, "You have to hurry." This sentence was naturally said to Chen Chongqing. Go Han looked towards the people of the Orthodox Academy, looked at Chen Chongqing and slowly nodded. He did not speak, but Chen Chongqing understood his meaning. Chen Chongqing was silent for a while, then stood up. The crowd was in an uproar. Chapter 590. The uproar was the amalgamation of many voices. The sound of discussion, the sound of sighs. The relationship between the Mount Li sword sect and the Orthodox Academy was no longer that initial enmity. It was just as Go Hanshi had told his junior brothers before coming to Mount Han. They were not enemies, but they were still opponents. Even if there was no enmity, they would still meet again. The Mount Li sword sect had easily repelled the hostile experts of Tianliang County. Go Hanshi had displayed his star condensation cultivation and, without a word, had forced back scholarly manners Zhong Hui. With the situation developing to this point, it was very natural for him and Chen Chongqing to meet. Almost 2 years had passed since the final match of the grand examination. Many things had happened in these 2 years, so would the result of this battle have changed? In the world, only Chen Chongqing and Go Hanshi were well versed in the Taoist canon. They possessed a cultivation level and talent that were difficult for their peers to reach. Everyone wanted to know just which one of them was stronger. Go Hanshi had already succeeded in star condensation, but Chen Chongqing had not. Logically speaking, he should not be Go Hanshi's match, but everyone knew that those events that had occurred in front of the Orthodox Academy last summer, surpassing cultivation levels to defeat star condensation cultivators that were unimaginable to ordinary cultivators, was not too difficult for him. But they could not completely favor Chen Chongqing, because although Go Hanshi had not been at star condensation for very long, he was Go Hanshi. Just this name alone was enough to confirm that he was no ordinary initial-level star condensation cultivator. Chen Chongqing stood up and walked towards the stone platform, countless gazes following him. Go Hanshi was also looking at him, very calm, very serious. Just at this moment, a clear sound suddenly came from the pavilion by the lake. This clear sound came from the zither strings, gurgling like water. Soon after, a second sound came from the zither, and then it did not stop. This was an extremely elegant piece of music. It was obvious that the person playing the zither was extremely well versed in the study of music. The light strokes of his fingers were extremely infectious, but for some reason, at the turning points of the zither, a few mistakes that even beginners would not make appeared, obvious pauses and interruptions. Who's playing the zither? Many people looked towards the small pavilion from which the zither music originated and thought of this question, and some people even added a few more words to the question. Who would dare to play the zither at this time? The door of the small building was closed. Someone remembered that the door of the small building had not been opened since a few days ago. So there was actually someone inside. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets gazed at the small building, and shook his head. He naturally knew who the person in the building was, but he did not expect that the other party would not listen to his advice and still insist on fighting. "Looks like our match can only be saved for the future," Go Han-shi said as he looked at Chen Chongqing, who was on the stage. At this time, he had already recognized the person who was playing the zither. Chen Chongqing also heard it and said, "I hope it won't be too long." There were still many people who could hear the sound of the zither. The sounds of discussion gradually rose and then subsided. Countless gazes were cast on the small building, faintly tinged with excitement. The zither player was Guan Bai, the true leader of the Heavenly Tao Academy's younger generation, famous name Guan Bai. Go Han-shi indeed wanted to spar with Chen Chongqing, but upon hearing the zither music, he had no choice but to concede. Everyone present was indeed looking forward to seeing the contest between Go Han-shi and Chen Chongqing, but they wanted to see the contest between Chen Chongqing and Guan Bai even more. This was because the people of the continent had already waited an entire year for this contest. Last summer, the gate of the Orthodox Academy was incomparably lively. Guan Bai did not appear, only standing on the side of the street and quietly glancing at Chen Chongqing. He did not say anything, but many people in the capital knew. He had given Chen Chongqing a year to mature. After that, no trace of Guan Bai was seen. This expert of the path of the sword from the Heavenly Tao Academy seemed to have vanished. It now seemed that Guan Bai had probably secluded himself in cultivation, all for the sake of preparing for today's match. With a creak, the door to the distant small building was slowly pushed open. A man walked out from the small building, his posture tall and straight, his expression serene and calm, not a speck of dust on his hair. He was Guan Bai, but he was very different from the Guan Bai of the past, and also very different from the impression of those who knew Guan Bai had of Guan Bai. The Guan Bai of the past had always been on the road, his body covered in dust, his edge threatening. Anyone who saw Guan Bai would feel a sword glow light up in their eyes, and would even feel the sword intent exuding from his body assault them to the point of tears of pain. The current Guan Bai was still like that long sword hanging at his waist, quietly resting in its sheath, not revealing the slightest edge. The noon sun shone upon the stone platform by the lake, blazing hot and exceptionally bright. Guan Bai slowly walked over. There was silence. Several hundred gazes followed his body as he moved. The crowd gradually parted, opening a path for him. Suddenly, there was a slight disturbance in the crowd, and then cries of alarm gradually rose up. It was unknown what they had seen, but they seemed particularly shocked. Tang 36 stood up and gazed in that direction, his expression instantly turning serious. Chen Chongqing had already seen it, and his expression was very solemn. The lake breeze lightly blew, and his sleeves lightly fluttered. Guan Bai's sleeves lightly fluttered, occasionally being rolled up. His right arm had actually been severed. An uproar, a true uproar. Cries of alarm rang out incessantly. Everyone believed that in this year, Guan Bai would continue his journey, perhaps conceal his identity and go to the northern battlefield to kill enemies, or perhaps cultivate and prepare for battle. Who could have expected that when he once more appeared in front of the world, he would be missing an arm? Even more shocking was that it was his right arm that had been severed. In the view of many people, Guan Bai was the genius of the sword most likely to enter the top 10 of the Proclamation of Liberation. He was much younger than Wang Po's generation. Now, he didn't even have the right hand to hold his sword. Would the once genius of the sword really fall into the mundane world? Under shocked gazes, Guan Bai arrived. After bowing to the elder of heavenly secrets and Su Yorong, he very naturally walked up to the platform where the orthodoxy was. No matter what, he was still a person of the Heavenly Tao Academy, a person of the orthodoxy. He bowed to Linghai Jiwang and Mao Qiyu. It was obvious that Linghai Jiwang and Mao Qiyu knew about his severed arm. Linghai Jiwang replied, "Just do your best." As the previous principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Mao Chuyu's emotions were naturally much more complex. He looked at Guanbai, wanting to say something but then hesitating. In the end, he only sighed and said, "It's coming." Guanbai replied, "It had to come in the end." Then he turned to Chen Chongqing and very calmly and solemnly bowed. Chen Chongqing did not dodge. He accepted his bow and then returned it. Guanbai calmly gazed at him. He also did not dodge, accepting this bow. A faintly discernible light appeared in his eyes, bright and somber, like the autumn sun high in the sky. "Everyone is waiting. Come," he said to Chen Chongqing. After saying this, the sword light disappeared into the depths of his eyes and could no longer be seen. Chen Chongqing looked at his empty sleeve and said, "I don't think it's appropriate." Guanbai replied, "In this year, no more miracles have occurred on your body, and I've also learned to use my left hand in the sword. It's very fair, perfect for me to give it my all." Chen Chongqing fell silent, then asked, "Why can't you let go?" "No one has let go of their hand as thoroughly as I have," Guanbai said with a smile. His hand was already gone, so what need was there to let go? It was just that there were some things that could not be let go. His smile gradually faded as he calmly said to Chen Chongqing, "No matter how unbearable Huan Yu is, he's still my junior brother." Yes, there were many things that could not be let go. Although Liang Xiaoxiao had colluded with the demons, his crimes unpardonable, Go Hanshi and the other disciples of the Mountly Sword sect would still miss him. Just like Zhixio had said, if Tang 36 really did something that angered both men and gods, Chen Chongqing would still find it impossible to loathe him. Grudges had always been unresolvable and incomprehensible. The matter is pretty much done, but it seems like my laziness has returned. I'll do my best to recover as soon as possible. Chapter 591. Guanbai had given his opinion, and now it was up to Chen Chongqing whether or not he would accept it. To him, this truly was a rather troublesome problem. In the view of many people, at least today, he should not have taken action. Guanbai was not one of those ordinary initial-level star condensation cultivators who had once lost to his sword, but a true expert of the sword, his cultivation far above Chen Chongqing's. More importantly, Guanbai had for some reason been heavily injured, his right arm severed. Even if he did as he said and mastered the sword with his left hand in this year, it was still impossible for him to recover his peak strength. Even if Chen Chongqing used all his strength to defeat his opponent, it would not bring him any glory. He was the future pope. If he won, he would only provoke criticism, but if he lost, it would be extremely humiliating. The best method was to not accept his opponent's challenge. It was very quiet. Everyone was looking at Chen Chongqing, waiting for his decision. No one dared to urge him, but the silence and those gazes were also an invisible pressure. Just at this moment, a clear and cold voice rose up from behind the layers of white gauze. "The road is long and arduous, but since you've already begun, how can you stop? As long as you continue to walk, there will always be a day when you reach it. There's no need to care about whether it's sooner or later, much less about victory or defeat. What need is there for your heart to be disturbed by the slander of the world? Could it be that you still can't see this clearly?" The number of people in the world that could speak to Chen Chongqing in this tone did not exceed 10. Of the people present, only the elder of heavenly secrets and Su Yorong had the right. The speaker was Su Yorong. Her voice could be described as clear and cold, but it could also be described as apathetic. There was not much clear emotion in it. Many people followed the voice to the high platform behind the layers of white gauze, gazing at that faintly discernible beautiful figure. A strange emotion arose in their hearts, because the atmosphere had become rather strange. Su Yorong's words seemed to be encouragement, but if understood from another perspective, they were more like goading, even taunting. When the crowd thought of this, they couldn't help but sigh. They thought, even a holy maiden with a brightly lit Tao heart would still be somewhat resentful at the humiliation of having her engagement annulled in the capital. When the people of the Mountly Sword sect heard these words, they began to have other thoughts. Guan Feibai looked at Go Hanshi and said somewhat uncertainly, "From junior sister's reaction, eldest brother should still have a chance?" Go Hanshi was well versed in the Taoist canon, but he really did not understand these matters. At this moment, the only person present who truly understood the truth of the matter was Tang 36. He looked at the expressions on the faces of the crowd and the movements on the side of the Mountly Sword sect. His lips curled into a cold smile, tinged with ridicule, as he thought, how could you people understand the affections of this young couple, and their display of affection? People thought Su Yurong's words were meant to mock Chen Chongxing. Tang 36 knew it wasn't, and Chen Chongxing knew even more that it wasn't. He understood what she meant. Cultivation required continuous tempering, and progress required continuous challenges. Victory and defeat were not important, and slander was even more insignificant. If he wanted to break through, he needed to learn to ignore all of this and return to the essence of cultivation. Through life's comprehension, through battle to obtain perception beyond the normal value, through the greatest pressure between life and death to obtain powerful spiritual power. He did not look at her behind the white veil, but at the hot mist in the depths of the lake. Finally, he withdrew his gaze and looked at Guan Bai. The lake breeze blew gently, blowing up the dust between the stone slabs, the light sleeves that had lost their substance, as well as his sleeves. He walked to the center of the field and arrived in front of Guan Bai. This was the first time many people had seen him up close. They discovered that the legendary Chen Chongxing was not particularly handsome, but his brows were extremely clean, even carrying a hint of youth. He stood there, like a fresh and clean spring breeze, possessing an aura of detachment from the mortal world. The crowd began to sigh with emotion as well as praise. Guan Bai was very calm, saying nothing more. He took the long sword from his waist, grasped it in his hand, and raised it in front of him. He only had one hand left, so how could he draw the sword? His hand slowly moved up, arriving at the hilt. His knuckles slightly tightened as he tightened his grip. With a pleasant grinding sound, the sheath slowly slid down, revealing the bright blade. This scene was very beautiful. It was like several dozen mu of moss on the surface of a lake being slowly swept up by a great gale and then carried away. It was more like a general who had fought a bloody battle on the yellow sands, slowly but firmly taking off the armor on his body, revealing a body brimming with strength. This was armor stripping. Armor stripping did not always mean returning to the field. It could also be the beginning of a grand battle. Or it could be said that this was a battle that returned to its essence, even carrying a childish and clumsy intent. This battle was not influenced by any external factors, was not entangled by the interests of factions, had no bargaining chips or gambling stakes. It was just a simple battle. It was a competition of strength, a struggle for victory and defeat, a battle to one's heart's content. It was just a simple sight of his sword unsheathing, but Guan Bai had completely revealed his intentions and fighting spirit. Many people's eyes lit up, especially cultivators like Guan Feibai, who did not like this sort of battle. Even Tang 36 felt his body heat up. He subconsciously walked over to the battlefield, arriving at the side of the Mountly Sword sect, wanting to get a little closer to this battle. Only Zhixiu had no reaction. His expression remained indifferent, unable to arouse any interest. Unlike what the common people imagined, he actually did not like fighting. In his view, the goal of fighting was to kill the enemy. Victory and defeat, such matters as satisfaction, were truly too excessive. In the next moment, the fighting spirit that had just been stirred up in the crowd rapidly vanished. The light in the eyes of Guan Feibai and the others instantly vanished, replaced by astonishment or defeat, because a sword intent had appeared at the peak of Mount Han. This sword intent came from the sword in Guan Bai's hand, from his brow and eyes, from his tightly bound black hair, from his empty sleeve, from every part of his body. This sword intent was incomparably awe-inspiring, incomparably sharp. The gravel and grass that Liang Banhu and Guan Fei Bai's swords had previously chopped into even finer granules. The lake water and wind that had once been severed and then restored were severed once more. Countless cracks appeared on them, and for a moment they could not be restored. The scene was rather mystical. Such a powerful sword intent. Even the proud and confident Guan Fei Bai and Tang 36 were forced to admit that they were no match for this sword intent. The crowd cried out in alarm, and then quickly grew even quieter. Everyone's gazes fell on Guan Bai's body, their eyes brimming with shock and reverence. He was truly worthy of being an expert of the proclamation of liberation, a famous figure of the Heavenly Tao Academy. Guan Bai had lost an arm and his strength had been severely damaged, but not only had his cultivation not dropped, his comprehension of the path of the sword had even advanced. Just like what Su Yorong had said to Chen Chongqing earlier, opportunities often came from setbacks, breakthroughs often originated from trials between life and death. Last year in the capital, because of the miserable encounter of the wild dog in the alley, Guan Bai was not willing to let the old Taoist nun leave, and then he suffered the greatest humiliation and blow of his life. He left the capital and secluded himself in a remote mountain village. He used half a year to recover from the wound of his severed arm, and then he began to quietly comprehend. By the stream at the base of the cliff, by the pond behind the farmhouse, he calmly and seriously pondered for a very long time. He confirmed that he had not done anything wrong that night, let alone the fact that he was already an expert of the proclamation of liberation, even if he was still that 5 or 6-year-old child who could not cultivate, he would still have stood up. Because this matter was right, was something that he should have done, so why bother with it? Why care who that old Taoist nun was? Why regret? No, there was no regret. Guan Bai did not know that many years ago, in the wilderness of Tianliang County, a person called Wang Pe had once thought about this problem by the stream and pond. After Wang Pe thought through this problem, he finally obtained his own path of the blade. Although this path of the blade was still far from being as powerful and terrifying as Zhou Dufu's path of the blade, in terms of cultivation, it was already qualified to be discussed in the same breath. This path of the blade was called straight. After Guan Bai thought through this problem, he also obtained his own path of the sword, which was also called straight. On that day, the mountain was covered with maple leaves, the cicadas by the pond were silent in winter. His path of the sword was complete. Chen Chongqing sensed Guan Bai's sword intent and felt admiration. He viewed Wang Pu as his idol, so how could he not like this sort of sword intent? Moreover, he faintly knew what Guan Bai had encountered in the capital. He greatly admired his opponent for being able to recover from the severe injury of his severed arm in a short year, and for his cultivation of the path of the sword to even surpass it. He even more admired the reason for his injury. Such a person, such a sword intent, how could he repay him? Of course, it could only be straight. With a boom, the plane of snow in his body began to fiercely combust, transforming into countless strands of true essence that passed through those narrow meridians and was transported everywhere. His body dragged out a blur on the stone plateau, transforming into a straight line. He arrived in front of Guan Bai and stabbed out with his sword. This sword was incomparably straight. Chapter 592. The lake wind poured into the sleeve of his Taoist robe, causing it to flap like a great banner. The stainless dagger flew through the air as if it was about to ignite. Out of respect, and also because of his strength, Chen Chongqing did not hold anything back. He attacked with his most powerful blazing sword, and the direction and angle chosen for this sword was naturally the intellectual sword. This sword seemed perfectly straight, but in reality, it was constantly changing its path. Guan Bai quietly stood at his original position. His sword had not moved, but his domain had already formed. With a rip, a small hole was torn in Qin Chongqing's sleeve. His sword had already arrived in front of Guanbai. Back in the wilderness, Su Li had said that in the present world, there were very few perfect star domains. But the current situation was completely different from what he had said, because it was not Qin Chongqing's sword that had found a hole in Guanbai's star domain, but Guanbai who had taken the initiative to disperse his star domain. It was just like the decision Liang Wangsun had made in facing Qin Chongqing's sword in Xuanyang City. They were both experts on the proclamation of liberation, so their intelligence in dealing with situations was often interlinked. Although Guanbai's cultivation in the path of the sword was high, he did not believe that he could definitely defeat Qin Chongqing, who had received Su Li's personal guidance on the path of the sword. If he could not obtain an absolute advantage in the subtlety of his swordsmanship, then rather than forming his star domain and passively waiting to be attacked, it was better to rely on the advantage of his cultivation to forcefully receive the attack. Just like that, Guanbai's sword forcefully chopped down. He paid no attention to Qin Chongqing's sword. Because his cultivation level was far higher than Qin Chongqing's, he believed that his sword would assuredly be faster and heavier than Qin Chongqing's, so Qin Chongqing would assuredly have to draw back his sword to defend. No matter how high one's talent, no matter how exquisite one's swordsmanship, it was impossible to change this fact. Guanbai's sword was like a waterfall descending from the sky, rumbling like thunder as it descended towards Qin Chongqing. He could only stop his advance and draw back his sword. A sword that could not return was forced to be drawn back. Whether it was the blazing sword or the intellectual sword, both had lost their meaning. The two most powerful sword techniques he had learned from Su Li had been so easily broken. Fortunately, Su Li had taught him 3 swords in total, and the third sword was most suited for defense. The stainless sword somewhat awkwardly returned to his side, somewhat clumsily raised to the sky to welcome the waterfall descending from the sky. The waterfall was on the mountain. No matter how hard the stone mountain was, it would be washed out by the waterfall into a deep pool. However, in the pool water, people would always see some stones covered in moss. Even after being washed by the water for 1,000 years, they still didn't move, persevering there. Just like the dagger in Qin Chongqing's hand. This was a sword that not even Su Li had learned. Guanbai's sword energy surged forth like a tide, but it was unable to break through Qin Chongqing's defense. The sunlight that shone on the lakeside became a lot lighter in an instant. That was because countless golden stars exploded between their swords, as beautiful as a fiery tree. There was a loud bang. Qin Chongqing retreated a few dozen feet before he managed to stabilize his body with difficulty. His Taoist robe was torn, his leather boots shattered, and a clear mark appeared on the stone platform. Guanbai did not give him any chance to catch his breath and followed his sword. He was using the Heavenly Academy's sword of hithering light. In terms of speed alone, it could be said to be unparalleled. Countless sword lights illuminated everyone's eyes. It was like the surface of the lake under the setting sun was covered in innumerable golden lines. The clear cries of swords incessantly rang out, particularly concentrated, ultimately forming a straight line. It was dull and monotonous, yet it also made one's heart palpitate, like a flute playing the highest note. Guanbai's powerful sword intent, accompanied by this clear cry, incessantly rose higher and higher. The sword glows on the stone platform became increasingly dazzling, making it impossible to look directly at them. The spectators grew more and more nervous. Guanbai's cultivation in the path of the sword was too powerful. No matter how exquisite Qin Chongqing's sword style was, just how long could he last? Based on the current situation, this battle seemed to have already been decided. Su Yorong sat behind the curtain, the worry in the depths of her eyes unseen by anyone. The nearby South Stream Temple disciples saw her tightly clench her hands, and thought that she was excited that Qin Chongqing was about to be defeated by his opponent's sword, and that her wish had been fulfilled. The array laid down by the pavilion of heavenly secrets had long since been activated. The stones by the lake shore began to exude countless powerful chis, the faintly discernible clear light separating the two on the field from the outside world. The sword cry that seemed like a straight line finally broke. This did not mean that Guanbai could not maintain such a fierce attack, but rather that his sword intent had already been raised to its limit. He no longer needed to deliberately condense his sword energy, but rather became even more free and unrestrained. The sword intent grew increasingly awe-inspiring, countless smooth cracks cut into the stone floor. Even the clear light enveloping the field seemed to be on the verge of being cut apart. Chen Chongqing and Guanbai's movement techniques grew faster and faster, almost becoming two streams of light. They constantly spun around the field, making it very difficult to see them clearly. As for the specific sword techniques they were currently using, besides the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, Linghai Jiwang, and a few others, no one else could understand them. After an unknown amount of time, the two figures finally separated. As the dust settled, the two calmly stared at each other, separated by Tensum Zhang. Guanbai was the same as before, without the slightest change. Chen Chongqing, on the other hand, was in a very miserable state. His Taoist robe had been cut into countless places, his face was pale, and the hand holding the stainless sword was faintly trembling. Everyone could see that he had suffered significant injuries and would soon be unable to hold on, but no one would look down on him or feel disappointed because of this. This was because the fact that he had been able to hold on for so long under Guanbai's sword was already an extraordinary feat. It could not be forgotten that although he was the next pope, a genius that everyone had placed their hopes on, he was still a young man, not even 17. Countless gazes fell on Chen Chongqing's body, everyone waiting to hear him concede. Conceding defeat was not shameful. No one could always win. Even figures like Zhou Dufu and Su Li, when they were young, they also had to experience this sort of thing. However, in the next moment, Chen Chongqing said something that no one had expected. He looked at Guanbai and asked, "Could I trouble sir to wait a little longer?" Guanbai's expression was very calm, because he had already expected this. He had been waiting for Chen Chongqing the entire time, had already waited for a year, so why should he care about waiting a little longer? He sat down cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes. This was his answer to Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said with a sincere expression, "Thank you." After saying this, he also sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes to meditate. At this point in the sword battle, both sides suddenly sat down on the ground and began to meditate. This scene was truly rather strange. The crowd was very confused and gradually began to discuss with each other. Many people did not understand why Chen Chongqing wanted Guanbai to wait a little longer. But some people faintly understood. Linghai Jiwang's complexion became extremely unsightly. A gratified expression appeared on Mao Chuyu's face. Go Hanshi was a little surprised at first, and then he silently smiled. But the Elder of Heavenly Secrets creased his brow. Chapter 593. A few days ago, on the island, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had told Chen Chongqing that if he wanted to delay the eruption of his internal injuries, then he should not continue cultivating. He didn't expect that Chen Chongqing not only didn't listen to him, but also advanced even more fiercely. In such a short period of time, Chen Chongqing was ready to break through to the next stage. He could not help but feel anxious and worried, but it was already too late. The lake breeze lightly fluttered his Taoist robe. Chen Chongqing's eyes were closed. He was no longer in this world. His consciousness returned to the most primitive place, that tranquil and profound sea of consciousness. With a slight thought, his sea of consciousness naturally produced waves that set off unimaginably huge wave. These waves were as tall as a 10-story building, and their momentum was extremely astonishing. They constantly pierced towards the gloomy sky above the sea. However, the sky was too high. No matter how high the waves were, they could not reach it. When they reached the peak, they would fall back down helplessly, smashing countless fine white foam on the surface of the sea. If the waves were not separated from the seawater, they would not be able to soar into the sky. If it was in the past, it would not be difficult for him to send a wisp of his divine sense into the sky, but today he needed to send more of his divine sense there. Therefore, he willed it again, turning it into countless sharp weapons, swords, sabers, and then. Sever thought. Above his sea of consciousness, a storm raged. Countless howling winds and torrential rain came from the horizon, transforming into countless seemingly real moves, slashing towards the surging wave. Orthodox Academy's true sword, Mount Li's mountain gate sword, 3 songs of the fisherman, 3 swords of Wenshui, Snow Mountain Sect's frozen frost sword, Star Caesar Academy's army vanquishing sword, Heavenly Tao Academy's sword of hithering light, South Stream Temple's 3 lanes of plum blossom. Countless sword techniques appeared in the storm and danced wildly on the surface of the sea. The 10-story tall waves were shaken by the slash and gradually separated from the surface of the sea. However, there was still a deep connection that could not be completely severed. An extremely resolute shout rang out from the surface of the sea. Then, a saber intent descended from the sky. Having blade technique, first form, origin. This was the most powerful saber technique in the world. Before this saber, everything would be cut in half. The huge wave finally broke off from the surface of the sea and floated up. When the huge waves left the surface of the sea, they turned into pure water, looking just like the lake outside the ethereal palace. Having lost its connection with the sea of consciousness, the seawater seemed to have lost all weight. It gently drifted towards the gloomy sky, drifting higher and higher, further and further away. Finally, it followed a passage that it had not truly passed through for a long time, but was actually strengthening every day, and arrived at the sea of stars in the deepest part of the sky. This sea water was the essence of his soul consciousness, the essence of his experience, and the most precious thing to him. When he arrived at the starry sea, his divine sense did not stop. It continued to move forward at a seemingly slow pace, but in reality, it was extremely fast. After a long time, he finally arrived at the edge of the starry sea. This place was extremely far away from the earth. It was already on the other side of the sea of stars. There was nothingness outside the sea of stars, but what about beyond the nothingness? Chen Chongsheng looked into the incomparably distant distance, and felt that there were still countless stars there. Back in the library of the Orthodox Academy, on that night when he ignited his fated star, he had this sort of feeling. It was like he was looking at the lights of 10,000 houses. Unfortunately, the other side was too far away. With the strength and density of his current divine sense, no matter what, he could not reach there. He could not explore the true edge of the world. He retracted his gaze and looked towards an inconspicuous corner at the edge of the sea of stars. There was an inconspicuous star there. It was very small, very red, and looked like an apple. This was his fated star. His divine sense slowly approached it. The sea water fell on the little red star. Not only did it not lower the temperature of the star and extinguish the flames, but it also made the red flames on the surface of the star even more violent. The golden wind and jade dew met and turned into countless molten magma, spraying countless starlight into the pitch-black space. Almost surpassing the limits of time and space, the incalculable amount of starlight from the extremely distant edge of the sea of stars returned to the earth and poured into his body. There was a loud bang. Chen Chongsheng, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly sunk half a foot into the ground. That was because the ground within a radius of 3 zhang under his body had sunk. The lake wind howled and swirled around his body, causing his Taoist robe to flap. The wind poured into his sword sheath, causing it to hum, seeming extremely wild and excited. Dust flew everywhere, rising into the heavens. It was as if black smoke had dimmed the bright sun by quite a bit. Someone inadvertently looked towards the sky and saw that in the gloomy sky, in a position relative to the sun, there was a faint dot of light that seemed like a star in the night sky. The problem was, it was still daytime, so how could one see a star? How could there be such a bright star in the world? That person shook his head, driving this absurd thought out of his mind, and once again looked towards the scene. At this time, only the elder of heavenly secrets was not looking at the cross-legged Chen Chongqing, but at the sky. And only he could be sure that in the gloomy sky, a star had truly appeared. The sea of stars contained an inexplicable fate. Even he could not determine the position of that star, but he knew why that star had appeared. On this ordinary day at the end of summer, the midday sun was still blazing fiercely. Who would notice that fleeting star? Even if they noticed it, who would dare believe their own eyes? In a mountain field on the outskirts of the capital, the Pope stood in front of Archbishop Melisha's grave, gazing at the name of his old friend on the gravestone. His eyes were tinged with worry as he said, "Back then, we were worried that he would mature too quickly, but now it seems that this worry was reasonable." On the highest due platform in the capital, the Divine Empress held her hands behind her back and gazed at a certain place in the sky. The sunlight was very dazzling, but she did not even blink. Ever since many years ago, when Emperor Taizong had driven her out of the imperial palace and demoted her to the 100-herb garden, she no longer feared looking directly at the sun. Today she was also not looking at the sun. Behind her, Mou gazed at her back, somewhat uneasily thinking, just what did the Empress see that made her remain silent for so long? In the most majestic and imposing palace hall of Shuelao City, the demon lord sat on a chair, silently listening to his most loyal subordinate report on the recent strange movements of the demon commander and the conflicts between the nobles and military advisor Black Robe's faction. He was still the middle-aged scholar he had been in Mount Han, but his face was much paler and the mountains and rivers he had seen were already in ruins. He somewhat wearily waved his hand for that subordinate to scram. Suddenly, he sensed something and raised his head to glance at the top of the palace. After a moment of silence, he stood up and walked to a green plant. This was a persimmon tree he had brought back from the stream in Mount Han. He gazed at the heavy persimmons on the treetop and frowned. "It's actually going to ripen so quickly?" Chapter 594. Taoist Ji and Yuan walked through the plains. They did not walk on the official road, did not take a boat to cross the Luo River. They only walked in the places with the least people, the places where the weeds were the thickest. Their Taoist robes were covered in bits of grass, and beneath their walking sticks was a crushed praying mantis. Because he was not good at walking, Yuan walked very slowly. Taoist Ji had to take care of his disciples' speed, so he naturally could not go too fast. Yet they had clearly been in the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han a few days ago, so why were they here, in the plains where they could see that mighty city? That city had no walls, but on a day like today when the sky was as blue as if it had been washed, it could be seen from several dozen li away. This was because within the city was a high platform, and outside the city was a high hill, as well as countless buildings that towered into the clouds. Returning to this place after so many years, Taoist Ji's face showed no emotion. It was still calm and indifferent, perhaps numb. Yuan had no impression of the capital, nor did he have any feelings, but his face still revealed some curiosity and yearning. But in the next moment, those emotions on his face transformed into solemnity and unease. He gazed at a certain place in the blue sky for a very long time. The stifling wind of the plains ruffled the black hair on his forehead. He only had one eye that could see, so staring into the distance like this was very easy to make him feel sore. He rubbed his eyes and couldn't help but wonder if his eyes were playing tricks on him earlier. "You didn't see wrong. That is your junior brother's fated star." At some point, Taoist Ji had also gazed up at the sky. An extremely faint smile finally appeared on his usually calm and emotionless face. Although the smile was faint, It concealed a very strong emotion. Too many years had passed, and he had almost forgotten which direction the wind was blowing in the Palace of Great Clarity when Emperor Taizong said those words to him before returning to the Sea of Stars. Hearing Taoist Ji's words, Yuren became even more uneasy. "There's no need to worry, this is a good thing." After saying this, Taoist Ji continued forward. Yuren looked at his back and opened his mouth to shout something, but no sound came out. He gestured with his hands, but he could not be seen. He could only shake his head and follow. The wind rustled the weeds on the plains, parting them to form a path. Master and disciple walked along the path in the wild grass. One was happy, the other worried. At the end of this path, the capital loomed. At the peak of Mount Han, by the lakeside of the Heaven Lake, many people had already guessed what Chen Chongqing was doing, or what he was experiencing. Countless shocked discussions sounded, turning into a buzzing sound like that of a swarm of wild bees. Then, it disappeared in an extremely short period of time, becoming absolutely still. Looking at Chen Chongqing, who was sitting cross-legged, everyone's faces were filled with shock. He was at star condensation. During the grand examination, Chen Chongqing had broken through to ethereal opening on the spot. Could it be that today, he would also break into star condensation? This genius of the orthodoxy, who had already created far too many miracles, was he going to shock the entire continent once more? Could he succeed? Choosing to break through at such a time was shocking enough in itself, but the real key to this matter was still whether he could do it in the end. If he could, it would be a miracle. If not, it would be a joke. Moreover, just being able to do it wasn't enough. What was star condensation? If those who did not understand cultivation had read a few related books, they would perhaps believe that star condensation was a higher level of purification, that one could borrow the radiance of the myriad stars bestowed by the sea of stars in the instant of breaking into star condensation and directly raise the strength of the body to an unimaginable level. This view was not completely without reason. Even if human star condensation experts did not condense a star domain, they would still be able to directly battle against demon experts in terms of physical strength and strength. But the true crux of star condensation lay in the 4 words condensing a star domain. Cultivators borrowed the frenzied radiance of the stars to directly open up the many meridians and circulations in their body, doing their utmost to light up more than 300 chi openings. From then on, they would possess an unending stream of true essence that, under normal circumstances, could be called inexhaustible. The radiance of the stars would manifest, forming a world of its own. Only at this moment could one be said to have entered the ranks of true experts. The problem was, how to distribute the amount of star radiance, how to choose the order and number of chi openings to light up. This was an extremely complicated problem. Even disciples of great sects with extremely deep resources had to undergo a long period of preparation with the help of their teachers before breaking into star condensation. If they were even the slightest bit careless, there was a high chance that they would fail in breaking into star condensation. There was even a chance that the star radiance would reverse, causing the cultivator to be heavily injured and their cultivation to greatly decrease. They might even lose all hope of breaking into star condensation for the rest of their lives. Among the numerous thresholds of cultivation, although star condensation was not as dangerous as ethereal opening, it could not be taken lightly. It especially required the person breaking through to have sufficient experience and comprehension. No matter how much of a genius Chen Chongqing was, he was still not even 17 years old. Moreover, he did not possess the bloodline of the true dragon like Qiu Shanjun ever since he was a child. He had floated in the sea of the Tao and had cultivated for less than 2 years. How could he have had enough time to comprehend, and experience? Even if he forcefully broke through and was fortunate enough not to experience a reversal of star radiance, if the order in which he opened the chi openings was wrong or if the number of chi openings was too much, there was a chance that the star domain he condensed would be flawed. Let alone perfect, it might even be very ordinary. To ordinary cultivators, as long as they could condense a star domain, it was an extremely extraordinary feat in the present world. It was very difficult for even the star domains of star condensation experts to be called perfect, but he was Chen Chongqing, the future pope. The common people naturally had different requirements for him, just like what Su Li had mocked in the wilderness. Could such a star domain even be worthy of being called a star domain? The crowd waited for the result with different moods, so the expressions on their faces were naturally different. Go Hanxi's expression was very calm, Guan Feibai's very solemn, and Liang Banhu's expression was rather desolate. This was because they had a deep understanding of Chen Chongqing. Since he had chosen this moment to break into star condensation, he had assuredly made ample preparations and was confident in himself. Zheshio's expression was very indifferent, but his pupils slightly constricted. Tang 36's face was rather pale, his hands tightly clenched. They understood Chen Chongqing even better and also believed that Chen Chongqing could successfully break into star condensation. However, they were still somewhat nervous, afraid that some accident might occur. No one knew that the person who was the most nervous was Su Yorong. She sat behind the curtain, her face expressionless, but her body was slightly leaning forward, as if she could stand up at any moment. A star began to shine in the daytime. Star radiance descended from the heavens and poured into Chen Chongqing's body. The hard stone platform sank half a foot because of this, and the scenery of the lake and mountain fell silent. Chen Chongqing's eyes were still closed, but he had already woken up and returned to the real world. He performed meditative introspection and examined the situation in his body. He confirmed that his ethereal palace was already wide open, that all his true essence had begun to ignite, and that the star radiance pouring into his body was about to go out of control. He knew that it was time to make a choice. He naturally wanted to condense a perfect star domain, and he also had the confidence that he could do this. Star condensation required a very long time to comprehend, sense, experience, and prepare. Although he had only cultivated for 2 years, he had already spent a great deal of time. Because his cultivation had always been different from others. He had begun meditative introspection before he had even succeeded in purification. When he had been drawing in starlight for purification, he had actually been at ethereal opening. He had always been using methods that surpassed his true cultivation level to cultivate. Last year in the Mausoleum of Books, when he was at ethereal opening, he had already begun star condensation ahead of time. In the wilderness, when Su Li had passed on the intellectual sword to him, he had stood by the lake and gazed at the starry sky, pondering how to break the star domain of a star condensation expert. At the same time, he was also pondering how to project the sea of stars into his own body, how to light up his chi openings, and what kind of star domain to condense. His starry sky had already been there for a long time. All he needed to do was wait for it to light up. Because I was stuck on a specific method of telling a plot, I pondered it for a very long time, but in the end I still could not come to a conclusion. I decided to move it to the next chapter. I thought for another night and stopped here. Chapter 595. On the stone platform by the lake, there was no longer any wind nor any sound. Suddenly, there was a muffled sound of thunder. This sound of thunder was a bit strange because it didn't come from the real world, but from people's sea of consciousness. This sound of thunder came from Chen Chongqing's body. It didn't come from the vibrations of the air, but from the explosion of true essence and the burning of chi openings. Somewhere on Chen Chongqing's chest suddenly became bright. The light came from his body, penetrated through his tattered Taoist robe, and reflected into everyone's eyes. That chi opening was lit up by him. Soon after, more and more muffled sounds of thunder sounded. These sounds of thunder seemed to come from the sky, but actually came from his body. More and more spots of light appeared in the depths of his Taoist robe. The order in which these chi openings were lit up seemed to have no pattern. These chi openings also didn't seem to have any connection with each other. If these chi openings were to be connected with a line, it would only be a very sloppy picture. As time went by, the atmosphere became more and more tense. The gazes that fell on Chen Chongqing became more and more concerned. He had already lit up many chi openings in his body. His Taoist robe became brighter and brighter, as if it was a glass lamp, incomparably bright from the inside out. At a certain moment, the sound of thunder finally stopped. He finally stopped the process of the star radiance lighting up the chi openings. No one could clearly see how many chi openings he had lit up. Did he light up dozens of chi openings like ordinary cultivators, or did he light up more than 100 or even 200 chi openings like those cultivators with extraordinary talent? The quiet world around him began to move. The breeze on the surface of the lake lightly brushed against his tattered Taoist robe. The light in the robe gradually faded, revealing star-like spots of light. Those spots of light seemed messy, but in reality they had their own pattern. They were the countless stars in the night sky, forming a complete star chart. This was the star domain. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes. His eyes were still as clean as before, but compared to before, there were some subtle changes. The depths of his clear eyes faintly emitted the light of stars, as if they were jade that had been washed by water for countless years. His presence had also undergone a great change, becoming purer and stronger. The lake breeze blew gently, causing his Taoist robe to flutter. He stood up, stardust drifting out from his sleeves and slowly dancing in the air. The stardust gradually disappeared, and so did the countless stars on his Taoist robe. However, an invisible barrier remained. He was still standing in the same place, but he was no longer in this world. There was a deathly silence. Chen Chongqing had successfully entered star condensation. Furthermore, the star domain he had condensed looked so complete that it even gave off a feeling of perfection. Previously, Go Hanshi had revealed his star condensation cultivation in front of Scholatry Manor's Zhong Hui, causing everyone to feel incomparable shock and admiration. But what about now? He broke Qiushan Jun's record, becoming the youngest star condensation cultivator in history. The silence was finally broken by excited discussions and shocked sighs. The place became extremely lively. Seeing Chen Chongqing open his eyes, Tang 36's tightly clenched fists finally relaxed. Then, he looked at Guan Fei Bai and raised his eyebrows with an indescribable pride. Guan Fei Bai did not look at him, nor did he look at Chen Chongqing. Instead, he looked at Guan Bai, who was slowly rising to his feet, his face filled with respect. Many people were also looking at Guan Bai with admiration and reverence. Only now did some people completely understand why Chen Chongqing had asked Guan Bai to wait a while for him. And Guan Bai had actually just quietly waited. This sort of demeanor was truly worthy of praise. There were also some people gazing at the high platform, at that beautiful figure behind the curtain. These people were thinking that since Chen Chongqing had succeeded in breaking into star condensation, the holy maiden's mood would presumably be extremely poor. Chen Chongqing sensed that star in the distant sky, sensed the power of its radiance, sensed the endless flow of true essence through his meridians, and was deeply moved. Because he had spent so much time comprehending and preparing, he was very confident that he could condense a perfect star domain. But a star domain was one thing. To him, the most important aspect of succeeding in star condensation was that it could partially resolve the problem of his true essence being limited due to the blockage of his meridians. It was even possible for him to borrow this power to directly break open those blockages in his meridians. He currently felt his body brimming with boundless strength. He was confident that if the demon lord came again and he opened the yellow paper umbrella, he would be able to block at least 2 of his attacks. This also meant that even if he faced the world's most powerful expert, he would still be able to protect his life for at least an instant. Although an instant could not cover 10,000 li, nor could it cover 100 years. It was enough for him to use all the methods he had hidden, allowing him to find a way to break through space and enter the Garden of Zhou. And as long as he entered the Garden of Zhou, he was confident that neither the Demon Lord nor any other terrifying expert would be able to kill him in a short amount of time. The result of his calculations was very perfect, which made him feel very at ease. The flow of true essence in his body and this rich feeling of strength strengthened this feeling. Breaking into star condensation strengthened his perception, making the scenery of the lakes and mountains in his eyes even more vivid. In short, he had never felt that the world was so beautiful. A few nights ago, after that long conversation with Su Yorong, he had resolved to break into star condensation during the Boiling Stone Summit. What he pursued was precisely this feeling of ease. Thus, even though he knew that his cultivation was far inferior to his opponent's, he still accepted his opponent's challenge. He wanted to borrow this pressure to break through that most crucial wall. Of course, he needed to thank his opponent for giving him this opportunity, and for giving him so much time in such a carefree manner. Chen Chongqing sincerely bowed to Guanbai and said with a sincere expression, "Many thanks, Senior." Guanbai did not avoid it. He had given Chen Chongqing 1 year precisely because he wanted to see if he could successfully break into star condensation in this 1 year. As expected, you did not disappoint me, did not disappoint the world. He looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "But in today's sword battle, I still have to win." In this battle, Guanbai was fighting in place of Zhuang Huanyu, who had committed suicide by the cold well of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He had the dignity of an expert on the path of the sword, the bearing of the young leader of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He could give Chen Chongqing enough time to break into star condensation, could even protect him, but he would not let Chen Chongqing leave with the attitude of a victor. By successfully breaking into star condensation, Chen Chongqing had accomplished his most important goal in coming to Mount Han. Whether it was the Pope's or Su Li's expectations, they had already been completely realized by him. He had no interest in the Heavenstone, even if he knew that the little black stone on the plate probably had some secret relationship with Wang Jitze. He did not care about the outcome of this battle, and was completely capable of leaving, but out of gratitude and respect for Guanbai, he had to seriously finish this battle, giving his first battle after breaking into star condensation to his opponent. He raised the stainless sword in his hand and pointed it at Guanbai, calm and respectful. Guanbai raised the sword in his left hand and very casually chopped down from above. Above was the heavens, below was the earth. Chopping down from above meant descending from the heavens. But his sword was not a waterfall descending from the heavens, but more like a flowing cloud high in the sky, carrying with it an even more profound meaning. As he gazed at this seemingly simple sword, Go Hanshi's expression instantly turned extremely solemn. The hair at Zheshio's temples suddenly floated up like steel wires. The beautiful figure behind the curtain seemed to faintly move forward. They could see the terrifying aspect of Guanbai's sword. While Chen Chongqing was breaking into star condensation, Guanbai was not idle. He also sat cross-legged on the ground, accumulating and comprehending. Guanbai was comprehending the world around him, the stones in the lake behind him, as well as the changes in the world and the movements of the stones as Chen Chongqing broke into star condensation. From this, he sought out a pattern and then refined it. This sword of his was no longer strength, but a pattern. The pattern of the world was the Heavenly Tao. Although this sword of his was still far from being the true Heavenly Tao, it was still an incomparably real sword of the Heavenly Tao. As the head of the 6 Ivies for the past 100 years, the Heavenly Tao Academy naturally had its extraordinary aspects. Its most extraordinary aspect was its Taoist technique that could sense the Heavenly Tao. As the previous principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Mao Qiyu was naturally incomparably familiar with this sword of Guanbai's. His face revealed sorrow, reminiscence, gratification, and many other emotions. In his view, Chen Chongqing had no way of receiving this sword, even though he had already broken into star condensation and his cultivation had skyrocketed. The Heavenly Tao Sword was the strongest sword of the Heavenly Tao Academy. This sword required the wielder to raise their spirit to the most perfect level, then become one with the world around them. Only then could it be used. It was impossible for cultivators of the same level to block this sword. Even the wielder himself, once he began to use this sword style, would find it impossible to stop. Because the Heavenly Tao could not be disobeyed, the Heavenly Tao could not be defied. If it were a normal cultivator who had just broken into star condensation and whose cultivation was still unstable, they would perhaps have thoughts of giving up before Guan Bai's Heavenly Tao sword. But Chen Chongqing would not. Although when he saw this sword descend from the sky, he already knew that he did not have much confidence in defeating Guan Bai, he still wanted to try and receive this sword. It was precisely because this sword represented the Heavenly Tao. In the last few years, he had been fighting against fate. What he wanted to fight against was the Heavenly Tao. He had to win, or at the very least, he could not lose that heart that dared to challenge the Heavenly Tao. So not only did he not retreat, he took a step forward to welcome the Heavenly Tao sword. As his step fell, thunder began to roar once more, as if countless small storms were taking form in his body and then beginning to furiously revolve. Boom! The star radiance in Tensum Chi openings began to explode, then link together into a line. A blocked meridian was thus opened. Everyone in the surroundings was able to clearly sense that the aura he emanated was actually much stronger than before. But this was still not enough to help him defeat the Heavenly Tao. He very calmly took another step forward. As his step fell, the wind stirred and his Taoist robe madly danced. Although it was tattered, it was like a banner of war. Another blocked meridian was opened, and his qi once more grew stronger. Soon after, his third step fell. And yet there was no thunder, no wind. There was no sound at all, only silence. His brow creased, somewhat pained, somewhat astonished. He turned his head to a certain place, seeming to be in great difficulty, as if this simple movement had consumed all his strength. That place was the high platform, isolated by a curtain. He gazed at the beautiful figure behind the curtain, his expression slightly perplexed, seeming very helpless. Just what had happened? He stood on the stone platform, his face pale, seemingly unable to make any movement. And at this moment, the Heavenly Tao sword had already slashed down. Chapter 596. Chen Chongqing toppled over. His eyes were tightly shut, no longer feeling anything. His fall was so decisive that it was like a tree on the summit of a mountain being blown over by the wind, like a mountain on the ground being quaked, like the toppling of the earth. At the same time, Guan Bai had already arrived in front of him, his sword also arriving. As he gazed at the fallen Chen Chongqing, his face revealed shock and confusion, yet he could no longer stop the sword in his hand, because this sword represented the will of the Heavenly Tao. Even though it was in his hand, he could no longer control it. Just what had happened? Why had Chen Chongqing suddenly collapsed? These questions had only just begun to appear in the minds of everyone present, but no one had the time to prevent the following tragedy from occurring. Because no one could have imagined that just a moment ago, he had broken into star condensation and shocked the entire audience, and in the next moment, he would enter such a strange state. Go Hanshi believed that even if Chen Chongqing was not Guan Bai's match, he should still be able to receive this attack. This was because he understood Chen Chongqing. Without sufficient confidence, he would not take that step. Zhixiu and Tang 36 were even more brimming with confidence in Chen Chongqing. They even unreasonably believed that Chen Chongqing could defeat Guan Bai's Heavenly Tao sword in a situation that no one was optimistic about. Mao Qiyu was most clear on the expert of the sword of the Heavenly Tao and its characteristic of no return. He was sure that Chen Chongqing would lose, but how could he have imagined that Chen Chongqing would not even be able to raise his sword, or even move it? Without even thinking about it, just who had the ability to react in such a short amount of time? Only the Elder of Heavenly Secrets could change all of this. He had known beforehand that Chen Chongqing had a hidden illness. Although he was not sure when the hidden illness would break out, he knew that it was related to cultivation. From the moment Chen Chongqing began to break into star condensation, he had always been frowning as he watched the scene. Moreover, as an expert of the divine domain, he had the ability to display a sufficiently powerful technique in the cracks of time. And yet, his wrinkled and incomparably aged hand rested on the armrest of his chair, blue veins faintly visible as it trembled. However, it still remained on the platform, with no intention of acting. Could it be that Chen Chongqing, having just broken into star condensation, should have been in high spirits, receiving the cheers of the crowd, would inexplicably die to the heavenly Tao sword? The shock and panic of the crowd finally became real, their voices shouting from their mouth. A cry of alarm had just risen from the platform when it was suddenly suppressed by the howling wind. A pair of pure white wings compressed the air at an unimaginable speed, stirring up a violent gale. The heavy curtains on the stage shattered into countless pieces, and a stream of light rushed out from behind the curtains. The speed of that figure was too shocking. Only a few people in the audience could vaguely see two pure white lines, but they could not see clearly that a pair of pure white wings compressed the air at an unimaginable speed, stirring up a violent wind between heaven and earth, and carrying that figure with a whistling sound. The stream of light arrived in front of Chen Chongqing. The sword of the heavenly law descended. A field of light blossomed like fireworks. In the light there were countless lofty sword intents, countless exquisite sword techniques, but there was only one extremely tough and divine will. Sword of great light. A loud boom resounded. The water in the heaven lake was shaken off the surface of the lake like a reverse waterfall. The ground of the stone plateau shook violently as if there was an earthquake. Pebbles danced wildly and filled the entire area. The sun became incomparably dim. The smoke and dust gradually settled, revealing the scene on the stage. An extremely thin tear had appeared on the left side of Guan Bai's lapel, but there was no blood. He held his sword, his expression blank, not knowing what had happened as he stared forward in a daze. Where his gaze rested, a large pit had appeared on the stone plateau. This pit was much deeper than the pit created by Chen Chongqing's star condensation, and it was filled with pebbles. Su Yorong stood at the bottom of the pit, her hand gripping the temple sword, her face pale. Squelch! She spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood fell to the ground and instantly began to burn. Golden red flames easily melted the pebbles on the ground. This was the true blood of the heavenly phoenix. Even though she possessed the bloodline of the true phoenix and possessed astonishing talent, in her unprepared state, she had forcefully received Guan Bai's sword of the heavenly Tao, so she had still been heavily injured. But in the end, before anyone could react, she had rushed in front of Chen Chongqing and received the sword, forcibly shaking the will of the so-called heavenly Tao. She had not allowed Guan Bai's sword to fall on Chen Chongqing's body, not even a sliver of sword intent. The temple sword of South Stream Temple, extremely important and precious to Holy Maiden Peak, had been carelessly thrown to the ground by her, because she wanted her hands free. She took the unconscious Chen Chongqing into her bosom. Two snow-white wings slowly descended, gently enveloping the two of them, just like on the island of grass in the lake of the Garden of Zhou. At this sight, the lakeshore was quiet, the crowd incomparably shocked. No one had expected that the first person present to react, to risk her life and be heavily injured to protect Chen Chongqing, would actually be her. In the crowd's view, she was the person who was least likely to appear. Countless gazes fell on Su Yorong's body, but she simply did not care. Just like how she did not care about the temple sword in the rubble. She only looked at Chen Chongqing in her bosom, her face pale, uneasy and fearful. At this moment she was beautiful, sorrowful, helpless, and weak. No one had ever seen her like this, not the people of the Mountly Sword sect, not the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, and presumably not the Holy Maiden or the Tianhai Divine Empress either. Just what was going on here? Zheshio charged over, several dozen sword intents crisscrossing and blocking his path. The house was right in front of him, but he could not approach a single step, because the female disciples of South Stream Temple had laid down a sword array in front of the house. Not many of the cultivators participating in the Boiling Stone Summit could bring along their companions from their sections. The ones with the most were probably the Orthodoxy and Holy Maiden Peak. This was also a result of their status. The 100-some South Stream Temple disciples that had escorted Su Yorong to Mount Han were all standing guard outside the house. South Stream Temple's sword array was extremely famous. Back then, when Zhou Dufu charged into Holy Maiden Peak, he had also expended some effort. No matter how valiant Zheshio was, he could not rely on his own strength to charge through. Zheshio was expressionless, but in reality, he was extremely worried about Chen Chongqing's current situation. Being forced back by South Stream Temple's sword array and having a wound on his shoulder, not only did this not dispel his thoughts, it only aroused his viciousness. A smear of blood appeared in the depths of his eyes and sharp claws extended from his fingers. He was preparing to transform and use his abilities to fight on the brink of life and death. But before he could act, he was stopped by someone else. Tang 36 looked at him and shook his head. At the very front of the South Stream Temple sword array, a female disciple looked at the crowd outside the house and sternly said, "The Holy Maiden said that anyone who dares to take a single step into this house will be killed without question." Yes, let alone Tang 36 and Zheshio, even powerful figures of the orthodoxy like Mao Qiyu and Linghai Jiwang could not enter the house. Besides the unconscious Chen Chongqing, the only people in the house were Su Yorong and the Elder of Heavenly Secret. Chapter 597. Sword intents crisscrossed and sword glows flowed like water. This was the hall that the orthodoxy resided in, but it was now under the control of Holy Maiden Peak. Several hundred people stood outside the building, the people of the orthodoxy at the very front. Upon hearing the words of the South Stream Temple disciple, their complexions became abnormally unsightly as they asked, "Just what does the Holy Maiden want to do?" This was also the question that everyone wanted to ask. The crowd had still not completely recovered from their shock. First, why had Chen Chongqing suddenly fallen unconscious? Had he failed to break through and caused the star radiance to flow in reverse? But at the time, everyone had clearly seen that he had clearly succeeded in condensing his star domain. In the records of the past, no cultivator had ever encountered this sort of problem. The second was Saintess Su Yorong's performance. Just when everyone couldn't react in time and could only watch in shock as the sword of Heaven Dao fell, she unexpectedly appeared on the field and blocked the sword for Chen Chongqing, even at the cost of being heavily injured. Why had she been able to predict this sword in advance? Why had she been willing to block this sword for Chen Chongqing? The story of the engagement had been passed around the continent for a long time. Everyone knew of the grudge between the Divine General's mansion and Chen Chongqing. Everyone thought that she and Chen Chongqing were enemies, even being seen as fated rivals. However, seeing her embrace Chen Chongqing in her arms, looking at the world as if it was nothing, revealing helplessness and frailty, who dared to believe those rumors? Zheshio did not think of these questions. He only wanted to know Chen Chongqing's current situation. Being blocked outside the building by the sword array of the South Stream Temple disciples was something he could not accept. He did not continue charging into the building because Tang 36 was blocking his way. There were very few people in the world that knew of the true relationship between Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing, but Tang 36 was one of them. Now the Elder of Heavenly Secrets also knew, or perhaps confirmed that his previous conjecture was correct, because he was currently in the building, looking at Su Yorong. Su Yorong sat by the couch, no longer as fearful and helpless as before. She had already regained her composure. But her beautiful face was still filled with worry and concern. Her usual bright beauty had become much dimmer. Her hand lightly grasped Chen Chongqing's hand. Seeing this, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets mentally sighed. Chen Chongqing still had not awoken. Su Yorong gazed at the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. She did not speak, but her question was clear. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets shook his head and said, "His meridians have already been severed. There is no medicine or stone that can restore them." Chen Chongqing was the successor of the Pope, the future of the Orthodoxy. Regardless of the relationship between the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and the Pope, it was impossible for them to watch as something happened to Chen Chongqing in Mount Han. The countless medicines and pills stored in the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had long since been delivered to him. His bed was even piled high with crystals, but they were of no use to his injuries. Anyone who heard this would probably feel despair, but Su Yorong's expression was still as calm as ever. She asked, "How many are broken?" "There are a total of 72 meridians and 365 qi openings in the human body." As a saintess who had been cultivating since childhood, she knew better than anyone else the location and direction of the meridians and qi openings. She also knew the serious consequences of breaking meridians. She was very worried about Chen Chongqing's current situation, but she needed to understand the specific situation in more detail, so that she could give targeted treatment later. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets fell silent for a very long time, then said, "Everything. All of them?" Su Yorong repeated. Her delicate and slender eyebrows rose up like swords. Her bright and limpid eyes narrowed. It was still swords. She did not believe the Elder of Heavenly Secrets' words. Even if Chen Chongqing failed to break through and star radiance flowed in reverse, according to the records and medical records, even the most severe backlash suffered by those cultivators would not be able to sever all the meridians in their bodies in such a short amount of time. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets said, "His meridians have always had problems. I vaguely knew before, but I didn't think that the problem would be this serious." Su Yorong gazed at Chen Chongqing on the bed, at his tightly closed eyes, his pale face, and asked, "Just what sort of problem has occurred with his meridians?" The Elder of Heavenly Secrets replied, "His innate sun wheel collapsed in his mother's womb, causing his meridians to be blocked and broken. At the same time, the walls of his meridians are much weaker than those of an ordinary person." Upon hearing these words, Su Yorong was quiet for a very long time. A hint of pity appeared in her eyes as she gazed at Chen Chongqing. Why would a problem occur now? I also didn't expect that the problem would erupt now. Now that I think about it, when he was breaking through, star radiance surged in and burst the walls of his meridians. This problem, why didn't he think of a way to resolve it before? This is an illness that cannot be cured. There is no illness that cannot be cured, Su Yorong calmly said as she gazed at the unconscious Chen Chongqing. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets looked at her and said with a hint of pity, "This is an illness that he has had since he was in his mother's womb. This is his fate." Was there an illness in the world that could not be cured? There was, and that was fate. The stone seal flickered in and out of existence in the snowstorm. The demon lord stood at the highest point of Shuilao City, gazing at the country he ruled. His expression was extremely indifferent, the broken mountains and rivers on his face already vanishing. A thin and small figure slowly walked out of the snowstorm and then kneeled behind him. "Rise." The demon lord's voice was emotionless. She stood up, her expression even more indifferent than the demon lord's, her voice even colder. "Imperial Father, I want to go to the capital." As she said this, she thought of those things she had encountered in the Garden of Zhou, those words that Chen Chongqing had said, and subconsciously frowned. In this way, the somewhat wide space between her eyes seemed to shrink a little. "Not permitted," the demon lord impassively said to his daughter. Nank's expression did not change. Chun Chongqing will return to the capital. The demon lord fell silent at these words. Just a moment ago, a persimmon on the persimmon tree he had brought back from the stream in Mount Han had ripened. It fell onto the white jade steps and smashed into a puddle of pulp, looking just like a crushed head. He had sensed it, so he had come into the snowstorm to observe his own country and ponder the matter of longevity. His Chongqing and the human called Chongqing. I'm very curious as to who will eat that fruit in the end. The demon lord continued, no one can resist that temptation, just like your brother. A ripe fruit would exude a fragrance, just like the throne of the demon lord that represented supreme authority. Nank calmly said, I will kill him. It was hard to say whether the him here was referring to Chun Chongqing or her brother. Daoist Ji and Su Rin entered the capital, but did not enter the capital. They went to the Mausoleum of Books and found a grass hut in an orchard on the eastern side of the mausoleum. Perhaps because of the existence of the Mausoleum of Books, no one in the capital noticed the return of this person involved in the bloody case of the Orthodox Academy. At the end of the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books, under the pavilion, the Mausoleum Guardian, the number 1 divine general of the continent, Han Qing, also seemed to be asleep. Summer crept by and autumn was about to arrive. Yuren went to the abandoned garden outside the garden to pick green peppers. Because his legs were inconvenient, he did not walk very far before getting tired. He stretched out his hand to support himself against a tree trunk to rest. With just a light support, quite a few fruits fell from the tree and rolled everywhere. One could imagine just how ripe they were. Yuren's face lit up with joy and he crouched down to pick up the fruits, preparing to let his master have a taste tonight. However, the moment his hand fell on the fruit, his expression changed. He also did not understand why, but he felt especially sorrowful. He suddenly very much missed his junior brother. The heavenly tome monoliths were the source of all the orthodoxy's knowledge. The starry sky was the direction of all the orthodoxy's spirit. These were all fate. There was not a single believer who did not feel reverence towards this. Holy Maiden Peak was a true disciple of the orthodoxy's southern faction, so it was naturally no exception. Su Yorong had received this sort of education since she was a child, and this sort of thinking had long since seeped into her bones. It was impossible for her to be like Wang Jitze and Chun Chongqing and say that they did not believe in fate. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had said that there was no cure for Chun Chongqing's illness, that it was fate. She lowered her head, her eyelashes lightly trembling. I want to bring him back to the capital. The Empress and His Holiness the Pope are both there. There will be a way to cure him. No one can cure him. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets looked at her, his expression grave and stern. The Empress can defy the heavens and change fate, but can you? Su Yorong was quiet for a while, then said, Perhaps not, but I want to try. She believed in and revered fate, even calmly accepting all the fate that was bestowed upon her, whether it was good or bad. But she could not accept the many tragedies and injustices that fate had inflicted upon Chun Chongqing. She released Chun Chongqing's hand and lightly placed it on his forehead. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets knew what she wanted to do and warned, do not use the sacred light technique. That will only worsen his injuries. Su Yorong did not respond, nor did she have any intention of moving her hand away. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets' voice became rather cold. You don't believe me? Su Yorong indifferently replied, Yes. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets fell silent, then asked, Why? Su Yorong raised her head to look at him and calmly replied, Because you did not attack just now. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had just admitted that he had seen the problem with Chun Chongqing's meridians, indicating that he had already made preparations for this matter. When Guan Bai's heavenly Tao sword descended, logically speaking, only he could have changed the final result. But he did nothing, calmly sitting on the high platform. Su Yorong calmly gazed at the Elder of Heavenly Secret. In terms of seniority or strength, she was far inferior to the leader of the storms of the 8 directions. But she was the holy maiden of the South, representing an extremely powerful faction in the orthodoxy. Her calmness had its own majesty, and her question had its own sharpness. "Do you really want him to die?" The elder of heavenly secrets gazed at the unconscious Chen Chongqing on the bed. After a moment of silence, he said, "I already told him that if he continued to cultivate, problems would definitely occur, but he did not listen, so he will become the Empress's problem. If you let him continue to live, then in the future, who will resolve this problem for the Empress?" He did not directly answer Su Yorong's question, but he had already tacitly agreed. Su Yorong looked into his eyes and asked, "What does his problem have to do with the Empress? Although I am called Heavenly Secrets, even if I exhaust my mind, I can only pry into 1 or 2 of the secrets of the heavens. I know the way, but not the reason." Saying this, the elder of heavenly secrets held his hands behind his back and walked out of the building. As the oldest member of the divine domain in the current generation of the Demon Lord, he truly was very old, his back somewhat stooped. The elder of heavenly secrets actually enjoyed interacting with young people. His willingness to support the divine empress was for the same reason. He was very fond of Su Yorong and Chen Chongqing. He originally wanted to explain to Su Yorong that a few days ago, he had used the Heavenstone array of Mount Han to imprison the Demon Lord. In the end, the Demon Lord had broken the array and escaped, inflicting heavy injuries on him. But in the end, he said nothing. Because it was a fact that he had been heavily injured, and it was also a fact that he wanted Chen Chongqing to die. As she watched the elder of heavenly secrets leave, Su Yorong's mind finally relaxed somewhat. Her face that had been as sharp as a sword once more became calm and gentle. At this moment, the female disciple of South Stream Temple, Yi Xiaolian, arrived outside the hall. Kneeling in front of the door, she said, "Temple Master, there is an urgent matter to report." Chapter 598. What is it? Su Yorong did not raise her head, not even batting an eyelash. Someone wants to force their way in. Yi Xiaolian uneasily said, "It's someone from the Orthodox Academy." Su Yorong was keenly aware that it was Zheshio who dared to force his way into South Stream Temple's sword array and still wanted to see Chen Chongqing. She expressionlessly replied, "Break his legs." Yi Xiaolian asked, "What about the 2 bishops?" This was Mao Chuyu and Linghai Jiwang. As prefects of the Orthodoxy, even South Stream Temple had to give them sufficient respect. Su Yorong said nothing, because she had already given her orders. She only calmly gazed at Chen Chongqing on the couch. Yi Xiaolian gazed at the distant beautiful figure from outside the threshold, her mood rather strange. Her talent was not bad, and she had entered Gentle Stream Temple to cultivate at a very young age. Gentle Stream Temple was very close to Mount Li's sword training grounds, and when she was young, she would often see Qiushan Jun practicing the sword there. Like all the other girls, she very naturally became Qiushan Jun's loyal follower. Thus, on the divine avenue of the Li Palace in the capital, she had spoken rudely to Chen Chongqing, only to be cursed by Tang 36 into tears. Later on, many things happened. She went to the garden of Zhou, and the object of her worship and love gained a person called Chen Chongqing. Perhaps for this reason, she had always felt a faint jealousy of Su Yorong, but the difference between the two was too great, so she had no way of expressing it. In the spring after the conclusion of the grand examination, she entered South Stream Temple from Gentle Stream Temple, so she would even less likely to show this sort of emotion in front of Su Yorong. As time passed, the jealousy hidden deep in her heart had long since vanished. In the end, the object of her worship and love had even changed from Qiushan Jun and Chen Chongqing to Su Yorong. Just like the common people of the capital and the senior sisters of South Stream Temple. She now looked at Su Yorong sitting on the couch, and felt that she was very tall. If Mo you were present, hearing Su Yorong's words and seeing her figure, she would assuredly feel that she was becoming more and more like the Divine Empress. Not long after Yi Xiaoyan left, the outside gradually grew quiet. Su Yorong calmly gazed at Chen Chongqing and noticed that he would occasionally frown. It seemed that even in his unconsciousness, he could still feel boundless pain. Her medical skills could not compare to Chen Chongqing's, but she could still be considered pretty good. After holding Chen Chongqing's hand for so long and silently feeling his pulse, she had long ago determined that the elder of Yorong's judgment was not wrong. If his meridians were all severed, how would he be treated? She looked back at the dark night sky outside the window. She didn't see any stars, so she knew there were clouds tonight. After confirming that no one was spying on them from outside the building, she turned around and undid Chen Chongqing's clothes. His tattered Taoist robe was thrown to the ground and his underwear was taken off. During the entire process, her fingers were very steady and her movements were very direct. There was no hesitation, and there wasn't a trace of embarrassment on her beautiful and slightly pale face. Chen Chongqing's skin was very smooth. It looked like a baby's skin that could be broken with a single blow. This meant that he had undergone the most perfect purification. Even after experiencing such a fierce battle and receiving such heavy internal injuries, there were no visible problems on the surface, not even the slightest wound. It looked like the colored porcelain popular in Xuelao City, with a faint layer of pink. This kind of skin was perhaps the dream of all young girls, but Su Yorong's expression was exceptionally grave. Because that layer of pink wasn't because it was tender, but because Chen Chongqing's skin was oozing blood. The blood that seeped out from his severed meridians was currently slowly seeping through his body. At any moment it could seep out of his body, or flow out of his eyes, mouth, and nose. This blood was no ordinary blood, but his true blood. Every drop of blood contained his divine soul. Su Yorong thought of the words Chen Chongqing had said to her in the mausoleum of Zhou. Her expression grew even more grave, her face even paler, and a hint of anxiety finally appeared in her clear eyes. This was the matter that worried Chen Chongqing the most in his life, and it was also the matter that worried her the most. Just now, she had intentionally exposed the Elder of Heavenly Secrets' intentions, not hesitating to fall out with him, precisely so that the Elder of Heavenly Secrets would leave the house. In the capital, Chen Chongqing had once said to her that the blood he bled no longer had the scent that he feared the most, but it was clear that the situation had changed. Perhaps it was the moment he successfully broke through and attracted the radiance of the stars into his body. Su Yorong had no way of confirming whether or not her calculations were correct, but she could not take the risk. She could not let the blood in Chen Chongqing's body flow out. A light yet suffused with a divine aura descended from her palm and enveloped Chen Chongqing's body. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had warned her that Chen Chongqing's meridians were currently all severed. Any sort of power, even sacred light, entering his body would only place an even greater burden on him, worsening his injuries. But she still unhesitatingly used the sacred light technique. It was not because she did not completely believe the Elder of Heavenly Secrets' words, but because this sacred light was somewhat different. The clear light fell on the surface of Chen Chongqing's body, but it did not enter his body. Instead, it stopped extremely close to his skin, a distance of not even 1/10 of a hair. Su Yorong's palm slowly moved and the clear light followed, slowly enveloping the surface of Chen Chongqing's body, not leaving a single spot untouched. This sort of technique required extremely powerful control, required an extremely tranquil, stable, and powerful spiritual sense. There were very few people in the world that could do this. Su Yorong's Tao heart was brightly lit. After using this sacred light technique, her face once more paled. The faint pink on the surface of Chen Chongqing's body, after being enveloped by that extremely thin layer of sacred light, became even fainter. Even if the scent of his true blood seeped out through his pores, it would still be perfectly isolated by the sacred light. After confirming that this problem had been temporarily resolved, Su Yorong's expression finally relaxed somewhat. The lake breeze blew in from outside the window, ruffling the hair on her temples. Fragrant sweat stuck to her pink cheeks, making her look very beautiful. The lake breeze blew through Mount Han. The clouds in the night sky suddenly dispersed for a moment. Silver light descended and the pine trees rustled like a silver sea, a very beautiful sight. Perhaps because the wild beasts in the forest had smelled something, or perhaps because they had been startled by the sudden descent of starlight, they howled at the vast sky full of stars, carrying with them the uneasiness of being disturbed. In the depths of the pine forest that was like a silver sea, there was a rustling sound. The leaves were numerous, obscuring the majority of that thing's body. Only the lines that were exposed could be seen. They were extremely graceful, and under the starlight, suffused with a silver light, appearing especially holy. An eye peeked out from the dense leaves, brimming with intelligence and tranquility. However, as it gazed at the small house by the lake at the foot of the mountain, it revealed a tinge of perplexity. It had clearly smelled something before, so it had come from 1,000 li away, disregarding those repulsive monkeys by the lake. Why was it that there was no smell now? After some time, it gave up. It turned and walked into the depths of the pine forest, borrowing the trees to conceal all traces of its body. Under the starlight, only a silver horn could be seen faintly discernible in the leaves. The wild beasts of Mount Han, because of an inexplicable restlessness, howled at the starry sky. The fish in the heaven lake also inexplicably became excited, constantly swimming in the water by the house. Several hundred little black fish surrounded the seed in the fine sand in the shallow water, constantly pecking at it, also seeming like they were kissing it. They pushed the seed farther and farther away, all the way to the depths of the lake, where it could no longer be seen. Su Yorong took out a cloth bag from her sleeve, took out a candied date, and threw it into her mouth. It was very sweet. At times like these, sugar could help calm the mind, and she liked to eat sweet. The first time she was brought to Holy Maiden Peak, she was still very young. Her teacher, the Holy Maiden, had asked her how she could maintain a steadfast Tao heart. She looked at the box of candied fruits on the table behind her teacher, twisted her small body, and shyly said, "It's just candied dates." Thinking of her childhood, she held the candied date in her mouth and happily laughed as she walked in. Then she remembered that a few nights ago, she and Chen Chongqing had sat shoulder to shoulder by the lake. At the time, they had also been eating candied dates, but how could they maintain a steadfast Tao heart? Her mind was slightly in disarray. However, it was still very sweet. She gazed at Chen Chongqing on the couch, thinking, although he's not as handsome as senior brother, he can still be considered handsome. I can look at him, and he's more bearable to look at. In his dreams, Chen Chongqing was still tightly pursing his lips, his brow creased, as if in great pain. Su Yorong stretched out her hand and rubbed the space between his brows. Then, her fingertip fell on his lips, and like a dragonfly, she lightly tapped and returned. "I won't let you die," she said, looking at him. Because she was holding the candied date, her voice was somewhat unclear, but it was also extremely clear. Blocking out the smell of Chen Chongqing's blood had only resolved the first problem. Next, she still had to resolve an even more troublesome problem. If Chen Chongqing continued to bleed like this, even if the blood was scattered among his internal organs, he would still die from excessive blood loss. How to staunch his bleeding was a very troublesome problem, because he currently could not endure the sacred light technique. And even if the bleeding was stopped, how to replenish his blood was also a very troublesome problem, because he had clearly lost too much blood. It was impossible to rely on his own hematopoietic mechanisms. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to resolve this problem. Just like the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had said, and just like Guan Bai's sword had faintly implied, the heavenly Tao could not be defied. Could the heavenly Tao ultimately not be defied? Su Yorong wanted to battle with the heavenly Tao, just like blocking that sword for him. She was confident, because when he had saved her, He had also taught her this. She took out the tong bao, her right forefinger lightly slicing across her left wrist. A bloody wound appeared on her jade wrist, which gradually expanded as more and more blood seeped out. The true blood of the heavenly phoenix ignited in the wind, emitting countless rays of light that illuminated her face with incomparable clarity, making her look incomparably beautiful. This chapter is good. I really like romance. Chapter 599. The Tong Palace was a bao, Su Yurong's most powerful technique. At the same time, it was the spatial artifact of Holy Maiden Peak. From a certain perspective, it was like the stainless sword to Chen Chongsheng. At this moment, the Tong Palace was placed vertically on Chen Chongsheng's chest. Su Yurong's expression was focused on the point of contact. Her finger lightly plucked, and the bowstring began to vibrate at an unimaginable speed, transforming into a shadow that the naked eye could not see. What followed was a hum similar to the sound of a zither. Chen Chongsheng had bathed in dragon's blood and was comparable to the most perfect purification. Normal weapons had no way of piercing through his skin, but at this moment, following the trembling of the bowstring, his chest was gradually being cut open by an extremely small wound. This was probably the principle of using nothing to penetrate something. Su Yurong obviously would not allow his blood to flow out from that wound. With a light wave of her left hand, clear light naturally sprinkled down, isolating the wound from the outside world. At the same time, with a slight movement of her divine sense, the burning heavenly phoenix true blood on her wrist was extinguished. She could no longer feel the boundless power, just like water. Her blood slowly flowed down the smooth body of the bao. Relying on the natural contraction of the spatial artifact, it became an extremely thin line of blood that entered Chen Chongsheng's body through that wound. After a long time, she stopped moving and used her fastest speed to repair Chen Chongsheng's wound. Her face was pale and very weak, perhaps because of excessive blood loss. But she did not rest, because the treatment had not finished. She raised her right arm and used her sleeve to wipe the sweat off her forehead. She held Chen Chongsheng's hand, closed her eyes, and began to mobilize her divine sense. Relying on the inseparable and intimate connection between her and the heavenly phoenix true blood, her divine sense entered Chen Chongsheng's body without any hindrance. Following the heavenly phoenix true blood, it freely moved through his body, and she saw those broken meridians and even more dismal scenes. Blood flowed through the broken meridians and into his body. In the gaps between his internal organs was his true blood, which contained his divine soul. For some reason, it contained an endless aura of life. Although she did not truly touch it and only saw it with her divine sense, and although she was willing to dedicate her life to him, she still felt her spiritual world begin to tremble at that moment. An extremely strong desire was born in her, and she wanted to seize it. Su Yurong closed her eyes. Her eyelashes trembled, and her face became even paler. Fortunately, the candied date in her mouth turned into saliva, which helped her guard her Taoist heart. The true blood of the heavenly phoenix had already spread throughout Chen Chongsheng's body. His 72 meridians, more than 300 qi openings, even the smallest places, such as the roots of his pores, had the presence of the blood. This was the moment. Su Yurong's divine sense moved quickly, and the heavenly phoenix true blood attached to the broken meridians almost simultaneously began to burn. Thousands of extremely tiny flames were born in Chen Chongsheng's body. In an instant all the flames were extinguished. Apart from the faint smell of burning, there was no other indication as to what had just happened. She had set a fire in Chen Chongsheng's body and set it aflame. She had transformed the heavenly phoenix true blood into the finest of particles to cauterize the broken meridians, thus staunching the bleeding. At the same time, she did not harm the extremely thin and brittle meridian walls. Su Yurong opened her eyes and gazed at Chen Chongsheng on the bed. After confirming that his injuries were under control, she finally relaxed. His 72 meridians had several thousand bleeding spots, but they had all been cauterized and sealed. He was no longer bleeding, so at least she did not have to worry about not being able to last through the night. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had determined that Chen Changxing would not be able to continue living, precisely because injuries like the broken meridians were basically incurable, especially under the premise that the sacred light technique could not be used. Who could have imagined that Su Yorong would actually be able to come up with such a fantastical idea and use such a miraculous method? She had transfused her heavenly phoenix true blood into Chen Changxing's body, not only helping to staunch his internal bleeding, but also accomplishing another equally important task: replenishing his blood. In the present world, no doctor would choose this method of replenishing blood, because different kinds of people had different kinds of blood. Different kinds of blood would clash in the body, causing a person to die even faster. The heavenly phoenix true blood was naturally precious, but not everyone could endure it. This was because it had always been the world's most tyrannical true blood. Even though her spiritual sense had restrained all its energy, its chi was still far too tyrannical. More importantly, her blood had always been different from the blood of other people in the world. Chen Changxing's blood was also different from the blood of other people in the world. His blood was the purest, containing boundless vitality. As a result, in the Garden of Zhou, he had been able to replenish Su Yorong's blood. Now, Su Yorong's blood had long since fused with his, so she could naturally replenish his blood. Back then, he had insisted on saving her, so now she could save him. The reason was that simple. Zheshio's legs had not been broken by the female disciples of South Stream Temple, nor had the miserable sight of rivers of blood appeared in front of the building. The reason was also very simple. Tang 36 was at his side. "He'll be fine, there's no need for you to worry," he said to Zheshio. Zheshio expressionlessly asked, "You trust Su Yorong so much?" Tang 36 replied, "Even if the entire world harmed him, she wouldn't." Zheshio did not understand. The entire world, or at least everyone in Mount Han, also did not understand. When the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had left, he had not said much, only saying that the Holy Maiden would watch over him. Hearing this, the crowd was even more shocked and confused. What sort of status did Su Yorong have? It was already incomprehensible that she had braved danger to save Chen Changxing, but now she wanted to personally watch over him? If she were still Chen Changxing's fiancée, this matter could be explained, but hadn't the engagement been annulled long ago? Didn't they all say that she loathed him? The Mountly disciples had rather strange expressions. Go Hanshi seemed pensive. In the end, Guan Feibai could not help but whisper, "No wonder eldest brother wanted to stay far away." The clouds had dispersed and the starlight shone on the lake. All was quiet and everyone was immersed in their own thoughts. After some time, with the sound of the door being pushed open, Su Yorong walked out of the building. The crowd surged over like a tide. The South Stream Temple sword array dispersed, but it still stood guard in front of Su Yorong. No one dared to ask anything of their own volition. Su Yorong looked at Tang 36 and Zheshio and said, "He still hasn't woken up. The two of you keep an eye on him. I want to rest a little." Only now did the crowd notice that her face was snow-white and she seemed extremely exhausted. Linghai Jiwang said, "I'll go see Principal Chen first." Su Yorong shook her head, calm but firm. Linghai Jiwang slightly creased his brow, confused and somewhat angry. He believed that since the two of them were on the same side, he should have been the leader in this matter, but he had unexpectedly been refused. What he needs the most right now is rest. Everything else can be discussed tomorrow. After saying this, she left under the escort of the South Stream Temple disciples. Not all of them left with her. Several dozen South Stream Temple disciples remained in front of the small building, the sword array blocking everyone else. Only Tang 36 and Zheshio were allowed in. The crowd outside the building gradually dispersed. They all believed that Chen Changxing had encountered some problems in breaking into star condensation. With the pavilion of heavenly secrets and the holy maiden most skilled in the sacred light technique personally intervening, there would naturally be no major hindrance. No one could imagine that if not for Su Yorong, Chen Chongqing would already be dead. At 5 in the morning, Chen Chongqing woke up. He knew that it was 5 in the morning, because he had always woken up at this time in the countless days that had passed. For a moment, he did not remember what had happened yesterday and prepared to get out of bed. And then he realized that he was not wearing any clothes. And then he realized that Tang 36 and Zhixio were both by his bed, staring at him. This made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Only now did he remember what had happened yesterday, and his expression subtly shifted. Tang 36 saw that he had woken up and slightly relaxed, but he had no intention of speaking with him. He turned and walked out of the building, saying, "I'll go inform South Stream Temple." Chen Chongqing said, "No, she doesn't want others to know of our relationship." As he said this, he subconsciously glanced at Zhixio, thinking, Tang 36 did not hide anything from Zhixio. Could it be that while I was unconscious, Tang 36 told him everything? The entire world knows now. Tang 36 unhappily replied and continued to rush out of the building. Chen Chongqing turned to Zhixio. Zhixio indifferently said, "I also know." Chen Chongqing froze, thinking, just what happened while I was unconscious. Chapter 600. Among the people of the Orthodox Academy, Zhixio's cultivation was not the highest, but his battle prowess was definitely the strongest. If it was a life-or-death battle, even Chen Chongqing would not be his opponent, because he had an incomparably rich battle experience and a terrifying will tempered through life and death, but he had no experience in this sort of thing, much less any comprehension. "Doesn't she hate you?" He very directly asked the question in his heart. Chen Chongqing smiled. He didn't know how to answer this question, but this smile made him feel the taste of rust faintly seeping out from his throat. It was the taste of blood. His expression changed slightly, his spiritual sense moved slightly, and he performed meditative introspection. He then sank into a long period of silence, his face very pale. So it was like this. Could it be that his great limit of 20 had arrived early? He could clearly feel that all the meridians in his body had been severed once, but for some reason, the thousands of wounds on his meridians had already been burnt and coagulated, no longer bleeding. Soon after, he understood why, because he could feel her blood flowing through his body. The clear and slightly cold lake water slowly flowed around the wooden pillars of the small building. The sound of footsteps could be heard. Su Yorong and Tang 36 walked into the building. Tang 36 indicated for Zhixio to leave with him, so only Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong were left in the building. The lake water was still slowly flowing downstairs. The little black fish was no longer as excited as before, but the core of the candy date had disappeared to who knows where. Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong quietly stared at each other. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The scene was very quiet, even a little desolate. He thought to himself, in the end, I am a man, some words should be said by me. He pursed his somewhat dry lips, looked at her, and very seriously said, I'm sorry. This simple apology had many meanings, such as he hid his illness, such as his fate was not good. He dragged her down, such as being unable to continue traveling with her. Su Yorong calmly stared into his eyes and said, That night, you said you had a secret you wanted to tell me, was it this matter? Yes, my body has been weak since I was a child. After I was 10 years old, my soul overflowed from my broken meridians. My master concluded that I wouldn't live past 20 years old, but, Chen Chongqing was silent for a while, then continued, I thought I could at least live to 20 years old. I still had more than 3 years of time. I thought I could really change my fate. I wanted to try, but I didn't expect that my 20 years would come early. Su Yorong said, and then? Chen Chongqing looked at her snow-white face and could imagine how much effort she had put in to save him. He said softly, I'm sorry. Su Yorong walked to the window with her hands clasped behind her back. Looking at the night sky full of stars, she said after a moment of silence, "You wanted to tell me, but I didn't want to hear it, so there's no need to apologize." Chen Chongqing was silent for a long time and said, "Fortunately, the engagement has been cancelled. Or else I'll become a widow." Su Yorong didn't turn around, her voice turning cold. Chen Chongqing could feel her current emotions. He was somewhat touched, somewhat comforted, but more than anything, he felt uneasy. He looked at her back and said, "I will die." Su Yorong's voice was even colder, even somewhat apathetic. And then? Chen Chongqing said, "Zheshio's illness has a chance of being cured, but my illness truly cannot be cured." Su Yorong still said the same two words, and then? Chen Chongqing continued, "Senior Su Li is so carefree and open-minded, yet he also doesn't agree to let his daughter marry Zheshio. How could your parents agree to you marry me?" Su Yorong replied, "I don't need the orders of my parents, and my teacher has already gone far away. My marriage is my own matter." Chen Chongqing asked, "Then what about the Empress? She dotes on you so much, cares for you so much. Don't tell me you don't need to listen to her opinion?" Su Yorong's voice was very calm. "I've never listened to the opinions of others in my matters. Moreover, if you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, then whether you're sick or not, about to die or live for 10,000 years, the Empress will never agree to my marriage, so your question is meaningless." The starlight fell on the surface of the lake and was reflected by it, falling on the house. The silver also outlined her figure in a silver line. She looked very beautiful, as if she could fly away with the wind at any moment. As he watched her figure, Chen Chongqing felt that she was getting further and further away. He whispered, "Then what about me?" Su Yorong turned to look at him, the sleeves of her dress rising in the wind. Her voice was as cold as the wind. "What about you?" Chen Chongqing looked into her eyes, showing no intention of backing down. "I won't let you marry someone about to die. I don't want you to tell the world about our relationship. Our engagement has already been dissolved. As long as we don't acknowledge it, then after I die, no matter who you marry, it will be much more convenient. For example, Qiushan Jun, after waking up and confirming that his meridians were all severed, that his vitality was gone, and that his days were numbered, he began to consider a few problems. This was his true opinion, this was his own decision. He thought he would calmly accept all of this, but when he said that she should marry someone like Qiushan Jun in the future, he didn't know why, but his heart still gave birth to a sour feeling. Su Yorong calmly looked at him, not speaking for a very long time. Just when Chen Chongqing thought that she would brush her sleeves and leave, she suddenly said, "Just like you said, our engagement has already been dissolved, so there's no relationship between us. This being the case, what right do you have to use the tone of a fiancé to discuss how to arrange things for me after I die?" Chen Chongqing didn't know how to respond, because everything she said was correct. "But I really will die, and I will die very soon. Everyone will die. Emperor Taizong and Zhou Dufu will also die. This is a common occurrence. I'm just worried about you." "Don't worry, while you're alive I can die for you, just like how you can die for me." This was the most passionate words of love, the most sincere confession, but Su Yorong said it very calmly and indifferently, as if she was explaining the simplest truth. Water flows downwards, the sun will rise again after it sets, everyone will die, we are lovers who walk the same path, so naturally we can sacrifice our lives for each other. If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't be able to adapt to the contrast between these words of love and the situation, and would be stunned speechless. But Chen Chongqing's personality was also very special. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it, instead, he felt that this was the type of person he liked. Because he was also a similar person, no matter if he was facing life or death, he would put his emotions in the deepest part, and face and deal with it calmly. "But I won't live for you. When you're alive, I will live my own life. If you die, I will also live well. Su Yorong looked into his eyes and said, But first you have to fight to live. I also want to fight to let you live. I don't want you to die. This conversation about love before life and death came to an end at this point. She very calmly obtained the final victory of this debate. There's still a chapter at night. The original title was A Conversation About Love Before Life and Death. I also wanted to name it then, but because when I posted it, I found that the word love couldn't be displayed, I got angry, so I insisted on using this title. I don't understand, how is this word sensitive? I'm really angry. Chapter 601. Before leaving, she said to Chen Chongqing, Prepare to immediately return to the capital. I believe that there are definitely people in this world that can cure you. As the morning light began to brighten, Go Hanshi and the others once more came to the house and asked if they could visit. The relationship between Mount Li Sword Sect and Holy Maiden Peak had always been close. The previous Holy Maiden was currently heading to another world with Su Li. Perhaps it was because of this, or perhaps it was because they were about to return to the capital and Chen Chongqing would most likely never have the chance to see Gohan Shi and the others again, so Su Yurong did not refuse their request. Chen Chongqing leaned against the couch, covered with a brocade blanket. He smiled at Go Hanshi and the other two. Go Hanshi asked, A problem occurred while breaking through? Chen Chongqing first nodded, then shook his head. Anxious, Guan Feibai asked, Is it true or not? Chen Chongqing replied, A few problems truly did occur while breaking through. It's not serious, just somewhat troublesome, but ultimately, the reason does not lie in this. Go Hanshi asked, Then what is the reason? Chen Chongqing glanced at Guan Feibai and said, Back then, all of you said that my fate was good, but in truth, my fate really is not good. I'm sick. Guan Feibai snapped, If you're sick, then cure it. Is there a need to act pitiful in front of us? Only the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and Su Yorong knew the specifics of the situation. Not even Tang 36 and Zhishio could guess at it. The cultivators that had come to the Heaven Lake of Mount Han to participate in the Boiling Stone Summit all believed that Chen Chongqing had encountered a few small problems while breaking through to star condensation. Go Hanshi and the others also believed this. Who could have imagined, who dared to imagine, that he was already nearing the end of his days? Chen Chongqing chuckled. That's reasonable, so I'll be leaving in a little while, returning to the capital to treat my illness. Will there be any trouble? Go Hanshi looked into his eyes and asked. Chen Chongqing shook his head. It's just that the journey will be a little long. There won't be any trouble. Guan Feibai and Liang Banhu thought that this was right. Although Chen Chongqing was not very old, he was the appointed successor of the orthodoxy. The confluence of the North and South had succeeded, the great Zhou dynasty was in its golden age, and the orthodoxy had millions upon millions of believers in the world. Along the way, Mao Chuyu and Ling Haijiwang, two prefects, would be no trouble. At this moment, a South Stream Temple disciple came to report that the carriage was ready and the Holy Maiden asked when to leave. Guan Feibai had been guessing for an entire night. At this moment, he could no longer hold it in. He looked at him and asked, You and junior sister Su know, what exactly is going on between you and the Holy Maiden? Chen Chongqing thought, not knowing how to explain, so he chose to say. Fortunately, Tang 36 and Zhishio had already finished packing their luggage, and the disciples of South Stream Temple had come to greet them, so they managed to gloss over this question. Tang 36 prepared to help him up, but he was stopped by South Stream Temple disciple Yi Xiaolian. Yi Chen. Tang 36, Xiaolian. Tang 36 was Tang. Tang, I said, if not I do I know do I Tang I Tang I Tang. 36 Chen Tang. The carriage. Tang Yang Tang Yang said. Tang. Chen, Chen, the sword, the carriage. Chen Chongqing said, It has nothing to do with Senior, it's purely my own problem. Guanbai replied, but in the end it was all because of me. You are the future of the orthodoxy, 10,000 times more important than me. If, because of me, the overall situation of the human race against the demons is affected, even 10,000 deaths would not be enough to redeem me. Chen Chongqing said, I heard that Senior has been fighting against the elites of the demon army in the north for a few years. I admire you very much. I only hope to have the chance to fight alongside you, but, at this point, his mood finally became somewhat gloomy. There were still many things he had yet to do, and many places he had yet to visit. Although he had been to the snowy plains of the demonic realm, he had yet to do anything to help the soldiers and civilians there. Guanbai naturally did not understand the true meaning of these words. There will always be a chance. In the future we will meet again in the snowy plains. Chen Chongqing nodded and said, Goodbye. Gohan Shi and the others also stopped to bid farewell to him. Chen Chongqing looked at them. His expression was calm, but his mood was getting more and more depressed. He thought to himself that it was highly possible that he would never see them again. Standing under the pine tree and gazing at the gradually vanishing convoy at the end of the mountain path, Gohan Shi's expression grew solemn. Guan Feibai was somewhat confused. No matter how heavy the injury, how troublesome the illness, once we return to the capital, His Holiness the Pope will personally treat it. What need is there for Senior to worry? Chen Chongqing's teacher is Principal Shang, and Principal Shang is Taoist Ji. We've also seen his medical skills before, and he can be called a divine physician. Junior Sister Su's sacred light technique has long since been cultivated to the pinnacle. If the two of them can't treat this injury and illness, is there anyone else who can? Even if His Holiness the Pope really can, why does Junior Sister Su want to follow him back to the capital? As Gohan Shi spoke, he organized his analysis. He felt that something was wrong more and more, and his expression grew even more solemn, even somewhat grim. Hearing these words, Guan Feibai came to his senses. Gazing at the end of the mountain path, he could still faintly hear the galloping of hooves. He somewhat anxiously asked, What do we do? Should we chase after them and ask? Gohan Shi replied, Since he doesn't want to say, why bother asking? The convoy headed south at high speeds, smashing countless green leaves and fruits along the way. The mountain path was covered in ruts and crushed fruit and leaves. Chen Chongqing was not in the Orthodoxy's carriage, but in Holy Maiden Peak's imperial carriage. The disciples of South Stream Temple were at his side, ready to form a sword array at any time. Those curtains could not block out those doubtful and curious gazes, but their swords could block out those gazes from disturbing the person behind the curtains. Just like in the pavilion by the lake, the Holy Maiden had decreed that no one was allowed to come into contact with Chen Chongqing. Logically speaking, although Su Yorong was the Holy Maiden of the South and had an extremely noble and lofty status, Chen Chongqing was still the future pope. There was no reason for the people of the Orthodoxy to agree to this arrangement. However, perhaps because of the engagement that had once existed, or perhaps because Holy Maiden Peak was acting too unyielding, Mao Qiyu and Linghai Jiwang did not raise any objections. Of course, the most important reason was that Chen Chongqing himself did not oppose this arrangement. Tang 36 knew the inside story, so he naturally would not raise any objections. Zhixiu, on the other hand, still did not understand the entire matter. The 500 li of Mount Han was quickly left behind by the madly galloping caravan. After leaving the mountain gate with the words Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, they quickly arrived at the small village at the base of the mountain. The populace and believers of the village kneeled on both sides of the road like a tide. There were even people in the fields, but it was impossible for the carriage of the Holy Maiden and the future Pope to stop here for even a moment. In the end, all that could be seen was some dust and a faint image. The snowstorm and bitter cold of the snowy plains were blocked by Mount Han. The plains of the north, at the beginning of summer and autumn, could still be considered verdant. Up close, one could see many melons and newly sprouted bean vines, but if one looked into the distance, the greenery that represented life would rapidly fade, mixing with the sandstorms on the horizon and gradually becoming desolate. It looked just like the wastelands where the human race and the demon race had fought. The curtains fluttered and the wind from the front of the road poured in, but it could not blow against his face. Chen Chongqing knew that this carriage had some sort of array attached to it. Only by doing so could it match the holy maiden's status and identity, but in the end, he still felt that it was a little too extravagant. He wanted to say something, but he also felt that it was inappropriate. When he saw the vast scenery in the distance, his thoughts shifted elsewhere. He gazed at the plains that seemed to hide countless cavalry and said, "Yesterday, heavenly secrets coldly watched me die, then, many people loyal to the Empress must also want me to die, right?" The armies of the great Zhou imperial court were all under the command of the 38 divine generals, and besides Han Qing, who guarded the mausoleum of books, all the other divine generals were like Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, absolutely loyal to the divine Empress. The journey from Mount Han to the capital was a long one, and they would have to pass through many passes and strategic towns. If the two sides truly shed all pretense of cordiality, an army could attack at any time. Returning to the capital would not be so simple. Su Yorong was injured and had not slept for almost an entire night, so she was exhausted to the extreme. After leaving Mount Han, she had been resting with her eyes closed. Now, hearing his rueful sigh, she opened her eyes and glanced into the distance. "That depends on whether heavenly secrets will inform the capital of your matter, and who it will inform. Before we return to the capital, whether this news will reach the military headquarters of those divine generals. Moreover, I don't understand, even if you're alive, what effect will you have on the Empress? How can your existence affect her?" Chen Chongqing looked around and saw that, amidst the dancing gauze, there were South Stream Temple disciples everywhere. Tang 36 and Zhixiu were riding their horses 20-some zhang in front, while Mao Chuyu and Linghai Jiwang were leading the orthodoxy's convoy very far behind. Moreover, this array was probably able to block the detection of spiritual sense. "You should have heard the rumor that the Empress defied the heavens and changed her fate," he said to Su Yorong. Su Yorong vaguely guessed at what he wanted to say. Arching her brows, she said, "Could it be that you also believe the nonsense of those ignorant people in the marketplace and countryside?" Chen Chongqing looked into her eyes and said, "I read Wang Zhice's notebook in the pavilion of Lingyan. This was a secret his teacher had told him. He had never told anyone else, but he had never thought of hiding it from Su Yorong, because his blood flowed through her body, and her blood flowed through his body. As the saying went, blood and water blended, mutual trust, nothing could surpass this." After a very long time, he concluded his story. Su Yorong looked at him and said, "You understand what I mean. Even if the Empress defied the heavens and changed her fate, it's impossible for it to be as the rumors in the marketplace say. In reality, the divine Empress had ruled over the human world for more than 200 years. Although her performance in the war against the demons had been unsatisfactory and her methods against those who opposed her had been excessively cruel, her performance in internal affairs and the livelihood of the people could be described as perfect. Even her opponents had not been able to make too much of a fuss about this. But even today, both inside and outside the imperial court were still seething with resentment towards her. She still had not obtained the sincere respect and love of the most simple and honest common people. A large part of this was because of those evil legends surrounding her, such as the most famous one. It was said that in order to defy the heavens and change her fate, to become the first female emperor of the human world, the divine Empress sacrificed all her future children to the starry sky. For the sake of success, she did not even hesitate to personally choke her first son to death, even successfully framing the Empress at the time. I also cannot imagine such a terrifying matter, and I will not use rumors to criticize the Empress, but you should be well aware that the Empress and Emperor Xian have been together for many years, but she truly did not leave behind a single descendant. Chen Chongqing said, the Empress might not have taken the initiative to commit such an evil deed as murdering her children, but it is highly possible that this is the price the heavenly Tao demanded from her, or perhaps a necessary condition for her to defy the heavens and change her fate. Su Yorong asked, what do you want to say? Chen Chongqing gazed at the nearby green plains and the distant vast desert. After a long period of silence, he finally said, the Empress defied the heavens and changed her fate, she still has not succeeded. As his voice fell, the world suddenly darkened. Clouds drifted over from some unknown place and covered the sun. With the roar of thunder, rain began to fall from the sky. In the past 2 days, it has rained during the great festival and the temperature has plummeted. In this midsummer, I caught a cold and my rhinitis flared up. 2 years ago, I also had a similar experience, a similar feeling. Today, when I was saving the manuscript, I encountered another problem. I spent more than an hour before finally retrieving the 3,000-character manuscript. I was truly terrified to the point of speechlessness, and my anger almost lasted until dawn. Chapter 602. Although I just learned that the Princess of Ping was the Empress's adopted daughter, I presume that many people, especially those in the capital, already knew of this matter. Everyone else, whether it's the Prince of Xiang's line or the Prince of Zhongshan's, has no blood relationship with the Empress. She has no descendants of her own, and many of the legends about her defying the heavens and changing fate originated from this aspect. Chen Chongqing gazed at the great rivers and mountains and calmly continued, but people have forgotten a very important matter. If that legend is true, then as long as Crown Prince Xiaoming is still alive, the Empress's defying the heavens and changing fate has not succeeded, or at least not ended. Su Yorong thought of those strange movements in the capital over the past 10-some years and the files that the chief eunuch of the imperial palace had always been secretly investigating. Her elegant brow creased. This doesn't make sense. Chen Chongqing understood what she meant. The divine Empress had already ruled for 200-some years. If she had not succeeded in defying the heavens and changing fate, how could she have ascended to the throne? If defying the heavens and changing fate is not an instantaneous matter, but a long process like a river, then this makes sense. The divine Empress might have hidden dangers that no one knows of. To her, Crown Prince Xiaoming's existence is the greatest danger. Chen Chongqing looked at her and said, if I am Crown Prince Xiaoming, then my existence is the greatest danger to the Empress. It's only natural that she wants to kill me. Su Yorong's deductive arts were extremely formidable, so she naturally would not miss a single point of doubt. She asked, if you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, why did Principal Shang send you to the capital? Was he not worried that the divine Empress would discover your identity? He and the Pope didn't even seem to have any intention of concealing your identity, as if they deliberately wanted the Empress to know of your existence. No question could withstand scrutiny. Even if there were no questions, many questions would still be asked. Chen Chongqing said uncertainly, because I'm much younger than Crown Prince Xiaoming, so this was a very powerful reason, but it also seemed like an excuse, because only the 3 people in Xining Village's old temple knew exactly how old he was. He knew that this would be very difficult to convince. After a moment of silence, he said, if I am still alive when we reach Jingdo, I will directly ask Uncle. Su Yorong looked at his face and did not see any anxiety or fear. Thinking about how he was so calm during the discussion, she thought to herself that the person she liked was really amazing to be able to be so calm in the face of death. Her heart moved and her actions followed her heart. She leaned on his shoulder and softly said, you will definitely live. Chen Chongqing looked at her and thought to himself, if he could continue to lean on her like this, it would also be a very blissful thing, but things didn't always go as he wished. Once the Elder of Heavenly Secrets sent the news back to the capital, the Divine Empress would definitely send people to kill him and not allow him to return to the capital alive. Su Yorong did not raise her head to look at his face, but she could clearly sense his concern. Unless the Empress personally acts, who can kill you? Mao Chuyu and Ling Haijiwang's carriage was in the rear. Mao Chuyu naturally would not let Chen Chongqing die. Although Ling Haijiwang very much wanted Chen Chongqing to die, he could not just stand by and watch. With these two peak star condensation prefects of the orthodoxy at his side, even the most formidable assassin would find it very difficult to get close. But Chen Chongqing was keenly aware that if the Divine Empress was determined to kill him, she would not just send a few assassins. She would assuredly send an army personally led by divine generals. No matter how strong Mao Chuyu was, how could he protect Chen Chongqing? Just as he was thinking these things, he suddenly saw a red flower in the green plains. This red flower gently swayed among the green branches, sometimes moving and sometimes still. It seemed to have stopped at its original location, but it never left his line of sight. As it turned out, it was actually moving along with the speeding carriage. It was already quite some time before dawn, so there was no dew on the grass or plants of the plains. However, the red flower was covered in morning dew. In the sunlight, it shone with a beautiful luster, a threatening red. Somewhat surprised, he turned to Su Yorong and asked uncertainly, "Biyanghong?" Su Yorong nodded, then turned to the distant plains and said, "Guan Xingke should be accompanying us 100 li away." Chen Chongqing was somewhat shocked. A few days ago, when the Demon Lord entered Mount Han, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had sent messages to all parts of the world. The closest Guan Xingke and the fastest Biyanghong had been the first to arrive. Chen Chongqing had not expected that after the Demon Lord returned to the snowy plains, these two powerful figures would not leave Mount Han. Moreover, it seemed that they would escort him all the way back to the capital. Biyanghong and Guan Xingke were not ordinary experts. They were supreme experts of the divine domain, ranked among the storms of the 8 directions. Even if Chen Chongqing was the future pope, he still did not have the right to have them accompany him. Their appearance and accompanying him were even more important to demonstrate the intimidating power of the orthodoxy's conservative faction and the faction that supported the imperial clan, a sort of declaration. "The Empress has always had many enemies," Su Yorong said as she gazed at the little red flower in the plains. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, "It seems now that I'm the enemy that the Empress wants to eliminate the most." With 2 storms of the 8 directions accompanying him, no matter what sort of military force the great Zhou imperial court used, it was impossible for them to threaten Chen Chongqing's life. Just as Su Yorong had said, unless the Divine Empress personally acted, Chen Chongqing would be able to very safely return to the capital. Of course, he had to ensure that the illness in his body would not rapidly worsen. The current situation was rather complex, with many riddles that needed to be solved hidden within, as well as many dangers. Every so often, Su Yorong would use the sacred light technique on Chen Chongqing to ensure that the scent of blood in his body would not seep out. For this, she consumed a massive amount of her spiritual sense, causing her face to grow paler and paler. Even so, she did not rest. She seemed calm, but she was actually vigilantly watching the scenery along the way. She arranged for Chen Chongqing to sit in her imperial carriage, not allowing him to take a single step away. Whether it was eating, treating his wounds, resting, or even washing up, everything was done on the imperial carriage. At the same time, she did not allow anyone to take a single step onto the imperial carriage. Everything related to Chen Chongqing was personally handled by her: what to eat and what to drink, when to eat and when to drink, when to sleep, when to wake up, and who to see. It must be known that even Tang 36 and Zhishio could only come to the imperial carriage every day when they were resting and speak with Chen Chongqing from a distance of several zhang. On a certain evening, Tang 36 came to the imperial carriage. Just like in the past few days, He impatiently waited for a long time before the curtain was finally lifted. Then, not long after he spoke with Chen Chongqing, Su Yorong brought over a bowl of lotus seed porridge and indicated for the South Stream Temple disciples to lower the curtain once more. Through the curtain, one could faintly see Su Yorong feeding Chen Chongqing porridge. Tang 36 was furious and yelled inside, "Are you raising a child? It's not like you're his mother." The expressions of the South Stream Temple disciples instantly changed, and then the clanging of swords filled the air. Tang 36 naturally did not have the courage to compete with the sword array of South Stream Temple, so he resentfully turned and returned to the Orthodox Academy's carriage. In the first few days, Zhixiu would go with him every day to see Chen Chongqing. Later on, after confirming that there was nothing wrong with Chen Chongqing, he had no patience to interact with the women of South Stream Temple, nor was he willing to look at those scenes on the imperial carriage, so he never went again. Now, seeing Tang 36's indignant expression, after asking about the matter, he said nothing. "Don't you think it's very strange?" Tang 36 asked. Zhixiu said nothing. He naturally knew that there was something wrong with this matter, but Chen Chongqing seemed to trust Su Yorong a little more, so he could only watch from the side. Many people found it very strange, felt that there was something wrong. From the moment they left Mount Han, many people's gazes had never left the imperial carriage. The mood of the crowd was rather strange, thinking, just what is going on here? It's already been many days. The Holy Maiden and Chen Chongqing have been together day and night on the imperial carriage. Just what are they doing? By now, many people had already vaguely guessed that perhaps they had been together for a very long time, but they still found it impossible to accept that they were together at all times. This had nothing to do with alignment or stance. They just found it impossible to accept that the Holy Maiden, as pure as ice and pure as jade, would bring a stinky man with her every day. This was truly rather unsightly. The disciples of South Stream Temple would often see her bring tea and water to Chen Chongqing. There was even a female disciple who had personally seen her wash Chen Chongqing's body. Even if they were already together, even if he was injured, was there a need for the Holy Maiden to personally serve him? Because of these matters, the atmosphere in the convoy had always been rather strange, and the mood of the South Stream Temple disciples was even more oppressive. Because Su Yorong was their temple master, the Holy Maiden they most respected and viewed as a god. On the same night, South Stream Temple disciple Yi Xiaolian took a letter written by Chen Chongqing and went to the Orthodox Academy's carriage. Chapter 603. Tang 36 opened the letter and realized that Chen Chongqing heard what he said before and was worried that he would cause trouble, so he gave an explanation. In the letter, he said that his wounds were not serious, but he needed Su Yorong to use the sacred light technique to heal him for a long time. Moreover, Su Yorong was a little girl after all, so it was normal for her to worry too much. These explanations were reasonable, but they could not convince Tang 36. However, on the journey back to the capital, he would not cause any trouble. He raised his head and prepared to have Yi Xiaolian help him bring a letter back to Chen Chongqing, but he discovered that this female disciple of South Stream Temple had an unfriendly expression. She stared at him as if she wanted to eat him up. 2 years ago, on the Divine Avenue of Li Palace, he had once berated this little disciple of Holy Maiden Peak to the point where she cried bitterly. To him, this was a very small matter, to the point where he had long forgotten about it. It wasn't until Chen Chongqing mentioned this matter that he recalled it and matched her with that little girl from back then. "Please don't look at me like that. You were the one who provoked me. I was just defending myself." Tang 36 looked at Yi Xiaolian sternly and said, "The one who provokes first is cheap. I hope you can agree with this principle." Not to mention whether there was such a principle in the world, but when it came to the word despicable, it was really difficult to find someone who could beat him. Yi Xiaolian was well aware of this point, so she naturally did not respond, only glaring at him. Tang 36 lowered his head and began to write a letter, saying, "Recently, the disciples of your South Stream Temple have all been very angry." Yi Xiaolian thought to herself, anyone who saw the Holy Maiden taking care of Chen Chongqing for the past few days would not be in a good mood. Tang 36 hastily wrote his reply and handed the letter to her. Seeing her expression, he guessed what she was thinking and said, "He is injured after all. Don't be too stingy." Yi Xiaolian could no longer hold back. "If he's injured, we can take care of him. Why must the temple master personally do it?" Tang 36 thought to himself that this was also the question that he and Zhixio could not understand the most, but he would not bring it up in front of her. He said, "They have an engagement, so it's naturally more convenient." Yes, there was an engagement. Yi Xiaolian very seriously corrected. The engagement has already been annulled, and it was annulled by Chen Chongqing himself. No matter who looks at them, they look like a loving couple. No one would be able to imagine that their engagement had already been cancelled. Mao Chuyu and Linghai Jiwang stood on the grassland by the road, gazing at the great imperial carriage in front of them. Linghai Jiwang glanced at Mao Chuyu, wanting to confirm if there was some deeper meaning behind his sudden words. Mao Chuyu looked at him and said calmly, "The current situation is very clear. The Holy Maiden will probably marry Chen Chongqing. Are you prepared?" Linghai Jiwang said nothing, his face rather gloomy. At this level, there was naturally no one that dared to demand Su Yurong with the secular standard of following her husband after marriage. However, if Su Yurong really did marry Chen Chongqing, there was no reason for her to be his enemy. He thought of the change in Su Yurong's attitude on Mount Han and felt a slight chill. Starting many years ago, Holy Maiden Peak had been the Divine Empress's ally in the south. The Divine Empress had pushed for the confluence of the north and south, receiving much assistance from the previous Holy Maiden. Coupled with the fact that the entire world knew that the Divine Empress treated Su Yurong like her own daughter, anyone could see that this situation would not change for a very long time. But what if this generation's Holy Maiden really did marry Chen Chongqing? Would Holy Maiden Peak continue to support the Divine Empress? Just as Su Yurong had said, the 10,000-li journey from Mount Han to the capital was very peaceful, with no problems encountered. Under the accompaniment of the vast sky of stars, a convoy of several dozen carriages entered the capital. The red flower that had been swaying in the plains for a very long time quietly vanished. Even further away, the man wearing the bamboo hat had gone to some high mountain to pick up the wild pleasures of stargazing. Upon entering the capital, the convoy did not split up. They did not go to the Orthodox Academy, to the Imperial Palace, or to the Divine General of the East's estate. Instead, they all went to the Li Palace. Mao Chuyu and Linghai Jiwang stood beneath the pine trees on either side of the divine path. They did not look at each other, but both gazed at the end of the divine path. Besides them, people like Tang 36 would not even have the chance to step onto the divine path. Su Yurong pushed the wheelchair Chen Chongqing along the divine path to that quiet hall in the deepest depths of the Li Palace. The Pope stood on the stone steps in front of the hall to welcome them. This was out of respect for the southern faction of the Orthodoxy, Holy Maiden Peak, and also because he was very worried. Chen Chongqing sat in the wheelchair, a gray wool blanket draped over his body. He looked very much like a sick person. In reality, his complexion was very good. He seemed full of vigor and extremely healthy, not at all like a sick person. Su Yurong was not surprised to see the Pope standing outside the hall. Her hands did not leave the wheelchair as she bowed. Chen Chongqing said to her, "I have some things to say to Marshal Uncle. Go somewhere else and wait for me." Su Yurong fell quiet for a while, but in the end, she did not reject his decision. She turned and walked towards the nearby hall. The priests standing guard outside the hall knew of her identity, and naturally did not dare to stop her. However, they could not help but show some shock in their eyes. After bowing, they hurriedly dispersed to notify the Pope. Su Yorong paid no attention to their gazes and expressionlessly walked into the hall. The space within this palace was extremely large and grand. The stone walls were engraved with countless classic stories from the Taoist canon, as well as many statues of virtuous predecessors. This was the Orthodoxy's Great Hall, the Great Hall of Light. The Orthodoxy was divided into the North and the South. The North respected the Pope, while the South respected the Holy Maiden. Over the countless years, the two factions had fought both openly and covertly, with countless stories to tell. Later on, as the situation gradually calmed down, several holy maidens of the South visited the capital. After all, they were of the same lineage, so they would naturally live in the Li Palace. However, since the North and the South were different, those holy maidens had never stepped into the Great Hall of Light. When Su Yorong was young, she would often play in the Imperial Palace and the Li Palace. She would also sneak into the Great Hall of Light to play hide-and-seek. But now that she was the Holy Maiden of the South, stepping into the Great Hall of Light had a completely different meaning. Upon hearing the news, Taoist Siyuan hurried over with several cardinals, wanting to show her around. His attitude was very respectful. "You don't need to pay attention to me. I just want to be quiet here," Su Yorong said. Taoist Siyuan and the cardinals were speechless. They thought, if you just want to be quiet, why must you come here? Could it be that you don't know what kind of shock it would cause if the people of the world knew that the Holy Maiden of the South had finally stepped into the Great Hall of Light? Su Yorong said no more. She held her hands behind her back and quietly stood at the base of the altar, gazing at the mural that towered over 30 zhang. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. Taoist Siyuan was helpless. He could only lead the cardinals out of the Great Hall of Light and wait outside. Even though it was late at night, the Great Hall of Light was still brightly lit. Countless gentle rays of light seeped out from the pillars, walls, and statues. Su Yorong stood in the light. Perhaps it was because the light was too bright, but her face was rather pale. Chapter 604. On the 10,000 li journey south, Su Yorong would at intervals use the sacred light technique on Chen Chongqing, isolating his qi from this world. As they passed through Beishan County, she had even given Chen Chongqing 2 transfusions of blood. Whether it was her mind, her true essence, or her most precious heavenly phoenix true blood and sacred light, she had already consumed far too much of it. Moreover, in Mount Han, in order to save Chen Chongqing, she had forcefully received the sword of the heavenly Tao and had already suffered significant injuries. But she still could not rest. At this time, she quietly stood in the Great Hall of Light because this place could allow her to recover faster, especially since she could obtain the replenishment of the sacred light. Moreover, this place was the closest to that place, only separated by a wall. If something happened, she could blast through that wall in the shortest amount of time and rush over. At this time, the Pope and Chen Chongqing were talking. The many stars in the sky made the capital seem to be shrouded in a silvery watery light. Eaves could be seen everywhere in the depths of the Li Palace, so it still retained more of the darkness. Chen Chongqing lifted the blanket, but he did not stand up from his wheelchair. He lowered his head and very earnestly folded the blanket into a small square. Then he raised his head and asked the Pope, "Martial uncle, just who am I?" He had asked this question to the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had given him a very certain answer, but it was not accurate enough. The Pope calmly gazed at him for a very long time. Just when Chen Chongqing believed that it would be the same as before, that he would still be unable to obtain an accurate answer, the Pope slowly spoke. "At the very beginning, when I received your master's letter, I believed that you were my martial nephew who had come to the capital to treat his illness. Treating illness is to cultivate the body, and your cultivation is to follow your heart, so I did not appear." Hearing these words, Chen Chongqing thought of those things that had happened 2.5 years ago when he first entered the capital. He faintly understood that before he entered the Orthodox Academy, his master's letter had arrived in the capital. The Pope walked behind him, and pushed the wheelchair into the hall. On both sides of the stone steps was a ramp carved with the pattern of flowing clouds. The wheels of the wheelchair rolled over it, emitting an extremely rhythmic creak. It was just like the Pope's voice at this moment, calm but tinged with sorrow. Only later on did Melisha find me. Only then did I know that he had also received a letter. The night hall was very quiet. The clear water in the pond reflected the starlight, sprinkling mottled clear light on the stone walls and pillars. The lush green leaves in the pot swayed gently, so beautiful that it was almost enchanting. To be honest, I still don't know what your master wants to do. The Pope released the wheelchair and walked to the edge of the pool. Picking up a wooden ladle, he scooped up half a ladle of water and began to water the green leaves. Starlight descended from the glass on the roof of the hall, falling upon the Pope's hemp robe as if writing down countless incomprehensible runes. Chen Chongqing looked at his slightly bowed body and asked after a moment of silence, "If you don't know what he wants to do, then why did you help him?" "I know very well that what you want to know the most is why your master sent you to the capital, if you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming." The clear water in the wooden ladle fell into the basin with a gurgling sound, but it did not drown out the Pope's voice. It was more like a background noise. "What your master wants to do in his life is very simple. To invite Tianhai down from the imperial throne, or perhaps to drive him down, so that the imperial throne can return to the Qin clan. I think he definitely had this in mind when he sent you to the capital. Today, I can already faintly guess at your master's intentions, but I can't be sure. In the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy, everyone said that it was Marshal Uncle who personally killed my master. Now that I look at it, it's naturally not true." The Pope's voice was as clear and gentle as flowing water. "The Orthodoxy only has me and your master, so how could I have the heart to kill him? Moreover, although he was heavily injured by Tianhai in the imperial palace, killing him was not so easy. I originally thought that this matter would forever remain hidden, but I didn't expect that you would come to the capital." Chen Chongqing replied, "Because I came to the capital, because of my master's letter, because Sir wanted to take care of me, the Divine Empress will very easily find out that my master is still alive. Everyone says that the Elder of Heavenly Secrets can see through the heavenly Tao, that Black Robe's schemes are unparalleled, but in truth, your master is the true schemer. Putting aside his true goal in sending you to the capital, just the fact that he intentionally let Tianhai know that he is still alive is tantamount to tearing open a crack between me and Tianhai, and this crack will only grow larger and larger. Since this crack cannot be mended, the suspicion between Sir and the Divine Empress will eventually turn into enmity. Yes, once there is enmity, once one senses the other's enmity, then when they stand opposite each other, they will become enemies. Doesn't this mean that Master is using the kindness Sir showed him back then to force Sir to stand on his side?" Chen Chongqing gazed at the Pope's back and realized that he was becoming more and more stooped, more and more like a tired old man. His voice subconsciously became downcast, just like his current mood. The Pope's voice, however, remained calm. "I said before, your master is the true schemer. In his view, in order to achieve his goal, anything can be sacrificed." Hearing these words, Chen Chongqing's mood became even more downcast. "Why is it like this?" The Pope's hand released the handle of the wooden ladle and picked up a dry towel by the basin to wipe his hands. "Back then, I had a falling out with your master because we had a different view of this world. Now, your master has used all his methods to force me to stand on his side, but I can calmly accept it. This is because time has changed many things. Tianhai and I already have a different view of this world." Chen Chongqing recalled the conversation he had had in this dark hall after leaving the mausoleum of books. "I also now believe that Tianhai should abdicate." The Pope's voice resounded through the dark hall. It was not very loud, but in the extremely distant night sky, it seemed like a clap of thunder. The hall was silent, except for the sound of the wooden ladle suspended in the air pouring water into the green leaf. After some time had passed, Chen Chongqing spoke again. Then what about me? Just what sort of role am I playing? You and Archbishop Melisha have taken such care of me these past 2 years, just why? I can only guess at your master's thoughts. Melisha probably knows a little more, but you must believe that this old man who has already returned to the Sea of Stars will not have any thoughts of harming you. His thoughts are not completely the same as your master's. He insists that in this process you will suffer many injuries, but you will also obtain many benefits. Benefits! Melisha believes that only through this method can your illness be cured. Can my illness be cured? Chen Chongqing's voice began to tremble. The Pope walked up to the wheelchair and looked into his eyes. His voice was as calm as water. Even fate can be changed, much less an illness? Chen Chongqing very quickly calmed down. He looked at the Pope and seriously asked, "Martial uncle, you already knew that I was ill?" The Pope replied, "Yes." Chen Chongqing's expression became even more serious. "Then, did you also know of that matter?" This was the deepest part of the Li Palace, the most secluded, even gloomy. Only the colored glass at the top of the hall allowed some starlight to shine down. He sat on the wheelchair, the wool blanket neatly folded into small cubes placed on the side of his legs. His clothes were thin. Time passed and the stars moved. At some point, the brightest star in the night sky, the dragon stallion, had arrived above the hall. Starlight pierced through the glass and fell upon his body. Starlight was even softer than snowflakes, and when it fell, it was naturally noiseless. Yet for some reason, there seemed to be a slight hiss, as if something had been ignited. This was Chen Chongqing borrowing the starlight to ignite the little remaining star radiance in his body. All the meridians in his body had already been severed. Whether it was the true essence produced in his ethereal palace or the snowy plains, there was no place for it to flow, so it charged around. Very quickly, his body began to heat up. His face, neck, and even his hands, which were exposed outside his clothes, all became somewhat red. If one looked at it with their eyes, it would be a light pink, but in his body it was a blood red, because it represented that his body was currently bleeding from the inside. As his body temperature grew higher and higher, his skin grew redder and redder, already transforming from an illusion of health into a strange and demonic demon. At the same time, an extremely faint chi emerged from the countless pores on his body and from his facial features. Drifting in the night wind, it arrived in front of the Pope. The Pope's expression suddenly changed. The boundless starlight in his deep and serene eyes instantly transformed into a raging river of stars. In those two eyes there was no longer any benevolence, only a powerful apathy and a callous will.